Stop pretending to be sick. Don't get in my way. You're just a useless housewife. I was feeling really unwell, but my husband pushed me aside and stormed out of the house. Husbands and wives are supposed to support each other, through good times and bad, but he left me behind. The word despair kept repeating in my head as I slowly passed out. Then, someone unexpected came to help me. My name is Wendy, and I'm 32 years old. I married my husband, Sam, who's the same age, about a year ago. I had a regular life as a working wife. Sam and I met at work, and he was okay with me continuing my job after marriage. We divided the house chores, though he wasn't very good at them, so I gave him only easy tasks to handle. He was willing to help, and at first, I had no complaints about our life together. One day, I started feeling a bit unwell and went to the doctor. "Congratulations, you're 7 weeks pregnant." I was shocked, but happy. That evening, Sam and I shared the news. "I'm going to be a dad? This doesn't feel real," he said, surprised. "It takes time to sink in, but the baby will grow, little by little," I replied, full of hope for the future. For a while, we were thrilled, but things soon took a difficult turn. "Hey, where's dinner? You were supposed to cook today, and the bathtub is still dirty." "I'm sorry, I wasn't feeling well and couldn't do anything," I said, trying to apologize. I was in my first trimester and had terrible morning sickness. I felt nauseous all day and couldn't even stand properly. I spent most of my time in bed and had to take sick days from work. I could barely function, but Sam didn't seem to understand. He started getting angry at me. "Don't think you can slack off just because you're pregnant. You expect me to work and do all the housework? How will you be a good mom if you're already this useless?" His words hurt me deeply. I kept asking myself how he could treat me like this, but I also wondered if he saw me as a burden since I couldn't help him as much as before. I thought about going to my parents' house until I felt better, but I didn't want to create distance between us. I kept telling myself that the morning sickness was temporary and would pass in a couple of months. But instead of getting better, Sam's attitude only got worse. After a while, my morning sickness eased, but I started having other health problems. I had to go in and out of the hospital and eventually decided to take a leave from work. I didn't want to risk pushing myself too hard and harming the baby. I spoke with my doctor and my workplace, and we decided this was the best choice for now. Sam didn't seem to care. "Stop relying on me so much. If you can't work, that's your problem," he said coldly. I knew I wasn't working, but my decision was for the baby's safety. Why did he have to blame me for everything? I tried to endure his harsh words. "Sam, I get a small allowance during my leave. Can you help with living expenses by covering a little more from your salary?" I asked. "What? Why should I pay for your part too?" he snapped. His lack of support made me wonder if staying married to him was the right choice. My worries grew bigger and bigger, like a balloon ready to burst. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought everything would be wonderful, but it wasn't. It was the opposite. Then came the final blow, my mother-in-law. "How are you doing, Wendy?" she asked one day. Sam's mom had raised him on her own after divorcing his father. She was a smart and kind woman who had always treated me nicely. "You should move around a bit more while pregnant," she said. "It's tough for Sam to handle work and house chores at the same time. You need to take care of those things." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. She wasn't a bad person, and I understood her perspective. She'd had children herself and probably thought I should be able to manage, but at that moment, it felt like she was telling me to stop complaining and handle all the housework, even though I was sick and taking time off work. "Yes, you're right," I said weakly. I wanted to talk to her about Sam, but her words made me feel more alone than ever. She didn't seem to understand how I felt. "Let me know if you need help," she said before hanging up. But her offer didn't bring me any comfort. Then one day, things went from bad to worse. That morning, I had a fever and felt so tired I couldn't move much. I also kept feeling nauseous. Somehow, I managed to make Sam's breakfast, but afterward, I collapsed on the sofa. "Stop acting like you're so sick," he muttered as he left for work, glaring at me. I crawled into bed, hoping to feel better, but my condition didn't improve. I was too weak to cook dinner. I thought about ordering food, but money was tight. The allowance Sam gave me wasn't enough, and I had to dip into our savings every month. Plus, the medical bills for the baby's delivery weren't going to be cheap. At this rate, we'd run out of money before the baby even arrived. Feeling desperate, I called Sam. "I'm really sick today. I said. I can't make dinner, can you bring something home? What? Are you kidding me? You're a housewife, that's your job. But I can't even get up. What do you want me to do? Figure it out, I'm busy, don't expect me to do your work. He hung up, leaving me in tears. Later that night, the front door slammed shut. Sam was home. Hey, honey, dinner is. Doesn't matter, I'm going out for a drink, he interrupted. By then, my whole body was burning with fever, and I could barely stand. Sam, I'm really sick, please stay home with me tonight, I begged. But instead of helping, he shoved me aside and yelled, "Shut up, stop pretending to be sick, you useless housewife." And with that, he stormed out. I collapsed in the doorway, too weak to get back to bed. Somebody, please help me, I thought desperately, but no one came. I was completely alone. Then, in my fading consciousness, I heard a voice from far away. "Stay with me," it said. "Who is this?" I murmured weakly before everything went dark. When I woke up, I was lying in a hospital bed. Anne, my mother-in-law, was by my side, looking worried. "Wendy, thank God you're awake," she said, relieved. "I called an ambulance when I found you collapsed at the door." Tears filled her eyes as she told me how she had come over, and I was overwhelmed with gratitude. "You're safe now, and so is your baby, I'll get the doctor," she said before quickly leaving the room. The doctor later explained that I had severe anemia and the flu. If Anne hadn't found me, the baby could have been in danger. My fever had been 104 degrees when I arrived at the hospital. "But Anne, why were you at my house?" I asked. She hesitated. "Sam called me, he said you were being lazy and needed someone to discipline you. I decided to come over and see what was really going on. That's when I found you unconscious." Her voice softened. "I'm sorry, Wendy, I believed what Sam said at first and planned to scold you. I should have listened to you instead." And then handed me a cardigan and smiled. "This is another reason I came," she said. "You always remember my birthday and send me thoughtful gifts. You sent me this cardigan last week, and I wanted to thank you in person." Her voice cracked with emotion. "I was worried you were really doing nothing at home, as Sam claimed, but after seeing what happened, I understand the truth now. You've always cared so much about others." Tears filled both our eyes as she held my hand tightly. "It's okay," I whispered, comforted by her support. And suddenly became furious. "Sam's my son, but what he did to you is unforgivable. How dare he treat the mother of his child like this?" Her anger gave me strength. When she asked what I planned to do, I told her, and she nodded firmly. "I'm on your side, Wendy, whatever you decide, I'll support you," she said. With her encouragement, I finally made up my mind. After a week in the hospital, Anne came with me to my house. I hadn't heard from Sam at all during my stay, but it didn't matter anymore. When we opened the door, we were hit by a disgusting smell. "What is that stench?" I asked, covering my nose. "It smells like a wild animal's been living here," Anne said, making me almost laugh despite the situation. We found Sam sprawled on the sofa, snoring and drooling. The living room was a disaster zone. "Wake up, you idiot," Anne yelled. Sam jumped awake, startled. "What, Mom? Wendy, you've been gone for days, what have you even been doing?" he complained. And didn't hold back. "What have you been doing, Sam? This house looks worse than a zoo, how could you live like this?" She wasn't exaggerating, the place was disgusting. Empty beer cans and food scraps filled the sink, damp towels and dirty clothes were scattered everywhere, the floors were sticky, and the smell was unbearable. "It's worse than a zoo, even animals are cleaner," Anne said, glaring at Sam. Sam glared back at me. "Don't act like you're better than me, you're the one who..." But Anne cut him off. "You couldn't even take care of yourself for 1 week. This is embarrassing." I looked around and calmly added, "I never realized you were this incapable of living on your own." It was true. I had always done the cleaning, laundry, and cooking before I got sick. The house had never been perfect, but it was never this bad. Now, I finally saw the truth. Sam wasn't just inconsiderate, he was completely useless. "Why did you leave Wendy behind that night?" Anne demanded, her voice sharp with anger. She couldn't believe what he had done. Sam looked like a scolded child, trying to defend himself. "She was faking it," he muttered. Anne's eyes widened in disbelief. "Faking it?" She was pale, burning up with a fever, and barely conscious. "Do you even have a brain?" she snapped. And was usually calm and collected, But this was the first time I had ever heard her raise her voice like this. Sam didn't respond, he just glared at me, his eyes saying, "How dare you turn my mom against me?" Then he muttered in a low, resentful tone, "Don't get carried away. I've been the one supporting you all this time." In the past, his anger would have made me timid and unsure of myself, but not anymore. "Well, fine," I said firmly, "you don't have to support me anymore. I'm ready to stand on my own." "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, confused. "It means I don't need you. Who would want to stay married to a grown man who acts like a helpless child and can't even clean up after himself?" I had put up with his attitude for too long, but this time, it was different. He had gone out drinking while I was seriously ill, trashed the house, and showed he couldn't take responsibility as a husband or father. I glared at him and asked, "By the way, you said you were out drinking with friends, but were you really? What were you actually doing?" His eyes flickered nervously. "That's none of your business," he mumbled. "Oh, it is her business," and said sharply, "She's your wife and has every right to know. Now, tell us the truth." Sam fidgeted under her intense gaze. "Well," he hesitated, but when he saw we weren't backing down, he finally admitted, "I'm sorry." As it turned out, Sam had been having an affair with a coworker ever since I became pregnant. It was such a cliché, I almost laughed. "What's her name? What department does she work in? How often were you seeing her?" And I grilled him, taking turns. While he stammered through his answers, I stopped the recording on my phone. "Got it, we've got your confession on tape," I said with a smirk. Sam's face darkened. "You tricked me," he shouted. "Yep, so what?" I replied. "Honestly, you saved me the trouble of hiring a private investigator. Thanks for being so cooperative." His expression turned into a mix of frustration and defeat. "You fooled me," he muttered bitterly. I couldn't help but shake my head. "The logic you have is unbelievable," I thought. "You were out cheating while pretending to be the victim, but sure, blame me for your mess." When I saw Sam stubbornly refusing to admit his faults, a wave of misery washed over me. I sighed deeply and muttered, "You're selfish, arrogant, and a liar, just like your father." "No, not my dad." The remark hit him like a slap in the face. His reaction was understandable. He despised his father, a man who, according to Anne, was mean, often drunk, and violent. Sam's parents divorced when he was in middle school, and he had spent years distancing himself from his father's shadow. Hearing that he resembled the man he hated was unbearable. "I don't drink or act like him," he protested. And interjected, her tone sharp, "That's not the point she's making." She looked him squarely in the eye. "Do you know how many times your father left me sick and pregnant, going out drinking while I suffered alone? Sons do become like their fathers after all. If I'd known, I would have divorced him before you could even remember." Her voice carried both disgust and sadness. Sam froze, his defiance dissolving into shock. "I won't let my grandchild have a father who's a bad influence," and continued, "Don't you agree, Wendy?" "Absolutely," I replied. "We don't need him, or rather, we're better off without him." Sam's face turned pale. The weight of Anne's words seemed to crush him. "Wait," he pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. "We're going to have a baby. Can't we calm down and talk this out?" He stepped closer, his tone coaxing, like a child begging for forgiveness. "What are you talking about?" I said, shaking my head. "We're way past that point." "What am I supposed to do, then?" he cried, covering his face with his hands. His fingers parted just enough for me to see his eyes, furtively watching my reaction. Even now, he clung to a shred of hope. "That's when Anne delivered the final blow. Enough, if you persist any longer, I'll disown you, do you hear me?" "Mom, what the hell, why won't you stand by me?" he stammered, his voice breaking. Anne's glare silenced him, his resistance crumbled, and for the first time, he looked utterly defeated. Some say a woman's enemy is another woman, but in this moment, and proved that a woman's greatest ally is also a woman, she stood by me until the end. I filed for divorce in the 7th month of my pregnancy. It was ironic, having a child had destroyed our marriage, but perhaps it was also a blessing in disguise. Afterward, I returned to my parents' home, where I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. My parents were initially shocked when I arrived, heavily pregnant and emotionally drained, but they quickly rallied around me. My father introduced me to a lawyer, who helped secure alimony that accounted for both the emotional and financial toll Sam had inflicted on me. I also confronted the woman Sam had cheated with, delivering a speech that left her speechless and me deeply satisfied. Once the divorce was finalized, Sam began visiting, asking to see his son. I still haven't received child support, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You don't need that, we're a family, and the best thing for us is to be together, he argued, his logic as incoherent as ever. I scoffed, you failed as a husband, the least you can do is fulfill your duty as a father, if you don't, you'll be good for nothing, just like your father. His face twisted with a bitter laugh, the weight of my words hitting him like a sledgehammer. He seemed haunted by the memory of his own father, a lonely, failed man who had left a lasting scar. Sam's silence was answer enough. Rumor had it that Sam had resigned from his job. He'd gone to his colleagues, complaining about our divorce and insisting that it wasn't his fault, but his attempts to justify himself only backfired. He genuinely believed he hadn't done anything wrong. He openly shared the details of how he treated me, and it disgusted everyone who heard. The rumors of his affair with a colleague spread like wildfire, and no one felt sorry for him. He was quickly labeled as a scumbag, and his once friendly colleagues began avoiding him. He became isolated, too uncomfortable to continue working there. Sam was the epitome of a delusional man. I feared he might still hold on to the illusion that we could reconcile, but that idea was as far from my mind as it could be. Wendy, I heard you're going back to work soon. How are you feeling? Much better now. I have to work for my son. That's right, you're a strong mother, she said, a smile of encouragement on her face. I hadn't told Sam about my plans, but sometimes, I would take my son to visit and. You're not my family anymore, now that we're divorced, she said one day, though her words no longer carried sadness. But don't worry, Wendy, I'll always be here for you, and for him, too. And had saved both of our lives. Now, she proudly held her grandson in her arms. As a fellow single mother, I'll need your guidance, I said, joking. Of course, and replied with a wink, from now on, we're not just friends, we're sisters in arms, or fellow detectives who've driven a villain to confession. Our bond had evolved, we were more like best friends now, and it felt right. But sometimes, a doubt lingered. You're just like your father. Those words haunted me. Would my son grow up to be like Sam? Would there come a time when I'd find myself thinking, like father, like son? There's no point in worrying about the future, I realized. I would teach him right from wrong. I'd show him the importance of kindness and compassion. My son would be my son, no matter what, nothing more, nothing less. As a mother, I would risk everything to raise him right. The sunlight poured through the cold winter sky, warming my face. It felt like a sign, like the world was cheering me on.
Amber had a poor memory of her childhood. It seemed like a grey mess, made up of different fragments, playing with friends, eating oatmeal, napping in daycare, and speaking with her mother. Like a patchwork blanket, each fragment was a memory, but not all of them were good. One memory that stood out was the day her mother's friend gave her 2 soft toys for her birthday, a green cat and a blue dog. They were small but adorable, with smooth synthetic fur and bows around their necks. Amber was thrilled with such a gift. She never parted with her plush friends, took them for walks, put them to sleep on her pillow, and carefully covered them with a warm blanket. One day when Amber was only 5 years old, she went for a walk in the rain. She often played alone in the yard, and her mother always assured her that she could see her daughter perfectly from the kitchen window, which meant that she was safe. However, Amber soon realized that her mother was more interested in watching TV than watching her daughter. On that gloomy day, there were no children outside. They preferred to sit in warm apartments drinking sweet tea with homemade cookies or sandwiches. They played dolls, board games, or watched cartoons, which were broadcast on TV in abundance over the weekend. Amber didn't have such a choice. She was bored at home, and she received no more attention than the dust under her bed. Therefore, right after breakfast, the girl put on her red rubber boots and ran out to measure the puddles. Of course, instead of friends, she took her kitten and puppy with her. "You must be obedient, little ones, and sit here while I prepare a tasty oatmeal for you." The girl ordered her toy pets strictly, seating them on a low bench. Amber herself began to cook food from available materials, water, sand and sticks, which replaced spoons perfectly. Amber's toys were obedient, but the weather outside decided to play a cruel joke on the girl. The sudden gust of wind blew her toys straight into a puddle filled with dirty water. The puppy was lying face down in the water, and the kitten looked sadly at Amber with eyes like beads, lifting its paws up. "My poor ones," the girl cried, throwing the bucket of sand oatmeal. She picked up the plush animals, trying to squeeze out the dirt from their paws and ears with her little hands. Amber was very upset at that moment, worrying about her toys. But the main disappointment was waiting for her ahead. At home, her mother, looking at Amber and the soft animals, pressed to her chest, assessed the damage, and wrinkled her nose. "Amber, why did you get your jacket dirty? Look at yourself. Who do you look like?" Amber blinked in incomprehension. Then she looked at herself, noticing the wet spots on her jacket and sleeves left by the toys. She was so worried about saving her toys from drowning that she didn't notice she had violated one of her mother's main prohibitions, to behave carefully. She sniffed, but didn't finish her thought. "Everything is simple for you, Amber. Do you think it's easy for me to wash your clothes every day and night? Can't you behave like a girl, not like a pig?" her mother grumbled, pulling off Amber's dirty jacket. Amber tried to explain that the cat and the dog fell. She wasn't guilty, it was the wind. But hearing the child's babble, her mother narrowed her eyes. "Not guilty again. You're never guilty. Who takes dirty toys to the house anyway?" "Can I wash them?" Amber asked, looking at her mother hopefully. "Of course not," Gloria replied. "Do you think I don't have enough laundry to do? Look, there's a whole basin of your dirty clothes, and if you wash them, the stuffing inside will get ruined. Go throw them away." "Mum, please," the girl couldn't help but sob. Tears gathered in Amber's blue eyes. She was sad at the mere thought of throwing her beloved toys away. How could she do such a thing to her friends? They were not garbage. "Just give me those dust collectors, you don't need them." Her mother was angry, always irritated by children's tears. She snatched the stuffed animals from the girl's hands and, taking wide steps, threw them both into the trash can in the kitchen, right on top of potato and carrot peels. "Don't cry, Amber," her mother scolded. "This will be a lesson for you. Now you will know not to bring toys like these outside, and you should take care of your things better." Amber wanted to sneak past her mother, steal the toys and hide them somewhere, but she was too scared to do so. So the little girl had to come to terms with the fact that anything valuable to her could be taken away by the slightest mistake. And there was no one to stand up for Amber because she had no other relatives besides her mother. Gloria and her daughter lived in a 2-room apartment that had not seen repairs in a long time. They had no relatives. Amber's grandmothers and grandfathers did not spoil her with pies, and her father did not carry her on his shoulders. If the absence of grandmothers in the house did not bother the little girl much, the lack of a father distressed her when she went to kindergarten. She was almost 4 years old when the children rehearsed songs and poems for Father's Day. Most of the rhymes were dedicated to fathers. That's when Amber asked the logical question, "Where is my father?" She reasoned that he must exist. After all, her friend Haley had a father, and he always picked her up after kindergarten first. And even the naughty Bed, who often spitted and constantly took toys away, had a father. So Amber's father must exist too. Naturally, she decided to find out the truth from her mother. They were returning home from kindergarten that evening along a familiar road. "Mum, do I have a dad?" the girl asked, holding her mother's hand tightly and quickly moving her feet to keep up with her adult steps. Gloria frowned, taking her eyes off the phone screen she was looking at on the way home, and looked sternly at her daughter. Yes, he was, but he swam away, was her answer. Of course, such an answer did not satisfy the curious little girl. And where did he swim to? She latched onto the word. He is a sailor. He is on a ship? Yeah, a sailor, long haul. Her mother said it angrily. He left me a gift in the form of you and sailed to distant countries, and I was left on the shore. Amber frowned, trying to understand what she had heard. Of all her mother's words, she understood the main thing. Her father was a sailor, which was very cool. The girl perked up, and the next day she told all her friends at the daycare that her father was a sailor. She began to draw ships on paper, more like triangles hanging on a sheet. And also the sea in shades of blue, which consisted of curved lines that a child's hand carefully drew. She decided that one of these drawings would definitely be a gift to her father when his ship returned. Amber tried so hard that each drawing got better and better. Even her teacher noticed that. Dear, you have talent. However, when the daughter shared this news with her mother, Gloria only snorted, and then Amber found a stack of her drawings set aside for her father's arrival in the kitchen. Her mother wrapped something in them. In the future, when Amber drew, she no longer shared her drawings with her mother. When she went to first grade, a man appeared in their house. Only he was not a sailor. Thomas worked in the construction industry. He dealt with finishing apartments and their repairs. Thomas and Gloria met on a dating site. Maybe the worker didn't really appeal to the woman at first sight, but the prospect of changing the wallpaper in the living room was too attractive to pass up. Their relationship got off to a quick start. It couldn't be called a couple created in heaven, but it was a practical alliance. Gloria had an apartment that needed repairs, and in general, she needed masculine hands. Thomas did not have an apartment, so he was happy to change his rental housing for a 2-room apartment in a good area. Soon the man and the woman, as they say, put up with each other and got married. But there was no place for Amber in their cramped world. However, Thomas regarded the girl neutrally, at least. Most of the time, Thomas didn't even notice Amber, but this arrangement suited them both. Amber never reached out to Thomas. She never tried to see her father in him. She had long since realized that the story about the sea was fiction, and they lived like this until Amber turned 10. When Amber came home from school with 2 A's in her school bag, for physical education and math, her mother greeted her with an unusual smile. The woman literally shone, standing in the narrow hallway and even helping her daughter take off her coat. The kitchen smelled of fried chicken and potatoes. The hungry girl's stomach growled instantly after sports games. "Go wash your hands and quickly go to the table," her mother said, taking the heavy, book-filled school bag from her daughter. "I also made a pie with apples, just like you love." Amber, not particularly used to such treatment, blinked in surprise. Her favourite dishes were only cooked by her mother on her birthday or when friends and guests came over, before whom her mother loved to show off her hospitality and housekeeping skills. "Wow, cool!" The girl smiled uncertainly and followed her mother's recommendations. 5 minutes later, she was sitting in the kitchen with a large plate filled with delicious food. "Amber," her mother said this triumphantly when the girl was eating her lunch, "I have wonderful news for you." Amber swallowed a half-chewed piece of golden fatty potato, washing it down with a generous sip of cherry compote. By this point in her life, Amber was an intelligent and well-read girl. Moreover, she had already learned all the nuances of sarcasm. Therefore, a puzzle of her mother's great mood and this hint at the news of the day was instantly formed in her head. "Great," The girl mentally stretched out. So they are finally sending me to an orphanage, and this is the farewell meal. She didn't say such a thing out loud. Gloria's mood went from good mood to I hate everyone in a split second, so Amber didn't want to tempt fate, swallowing the sarcastic remark with a piece of chicken. She smiled interestedly and asked, "Did something good happen?" "I have 2 pieces of news," Gloria said. "Firstly, I talked to Thomas and we decided to allow you to go to art school. You wanted to, right?" Amber's cheeks turned red. She blinked in surprise. "Yes," said the girl. She had been dreaming of this. However, her mother said that the prices for classes and additional expenses, such as albums and brushes for drawings, were too much for them. "See how good it is." Her mother clapped her hands. "And now, the second news." Gloria shone and put something strange in front of her daughter. At first, Amber didn't understand what it was, but then she stopped chewing. She had seen this in a series that her mother didn't allow her to watch. "Is this a pregnancy test?" the girl clarified. She didn't understand why her mother was so happy and why she put it on the table right in front of her plate. Her appetite was gone. Her mother, however, shone like a polished coin. She nodded, pleased with her daughter's intuition. "Yes," exclaimed Gloria, "you will have a little brother or sister, Amber. Can you imagine? Thomas and I are expecting a baby." Amber responded thoughtfully. "Great." She didn't know how to react to such news. Well, the baby will come and that's it. He or she won't appear tomorrow, so the joy of meeting can be rehearsed later. Besides, the babies didn't interest her at her age. Fortunately, her mother didn't delve into her daughter's emotions. She revelled in her own happiness. "Imagine the delight," Gloria chattered, grabbing the test strip and lovingly looking at it as if it were some kind of miracle of light. "There will be the sound of children's feet and laughter in this house again, and the first words, 'Oh, I remember when you were so little.'" Here, Gloria's eyes filled with genuine nostalgic tears. Meanwhile, Amber looked at her mother in amazement. Her life didn't prepare her for this turn. What caused Gloria's excessive emotionality? Joy from motherhood or hormonal imbalance? A mystery that had no answer. However, for the first time in her life, during the next 8 months, Gloria really tried to find a common language with her daughter. Gloria began to take an interest in Amber's affairs. She started giving her advice on her appearance, talking about boys, school, and her daughter's interests. She took her to art school, enjoyed when the teacher praised her daughter. Amber reacted to changes in her family like a wary wild animal being tamed and lured with tasty treats. On one hand, she desperately wanted to allow herself to be petted, but on the other hand, she feared that the hand stroking her might suddenly strike her. A kind and caring mother was something unfamiliar and strange to her. However, in a couple of months, Amber had already gotten used to her mother's kindness. The girl eagerly ran home from school to tell her mother about her achievements or share other news. Perhaps that's why the birth of a child became a catastrophic change for Amber. Samantha was born in the spring, and all the attention and all the love of the mother and stepfather instantly fell on the newborn girl. The older daughter was not just forgotten. She was completely excluded from the family. They only remembered her when it was necessary to help with something. Amber felt like she was deprived of oxygen. Sometimes she sat in the same room with her family, looked at her mother, stepfather, and little Samantha, and a worm of jealousy and resentment gnawed at her from the inside. It seemed to her that she was superfluous at this celebration of life, as if she were in a theatre and just watching someone else's happiness from the front row. At first, she tried to point out to her mother how unfair it was. "Oh, don't make things up," her mother angrily retorted. "You should know that parents love all their children equally. It's just that your little sister needs more attention, more maternal warmth, and more affection right now. She's just a tiny thing." The changes in the family happened not gradually, but all at once. Amber's toys were all given to the little one because, according to Gloria, she was already grown up and didn't need them. Yes, perhaps her mother was right, but it hurt Amber that she didn't even ask for her opinion on the matter. Later, Samantha, taking their mother away from Amber, set her sights on her things. She spoiled everything she touched. Gloria always waved away Amber's accusations with the usual phrases. "You're just so jealous and demanding, Amber. I didn't raise you like this. You should be ashamed that you don't share with your sister." Why did her 3-year-old sister need Amber's cosmetics? That was already a different question. Judging by everything, a rhetorical one, because her mother preferred not to answer it. There were many pictures of little Samantha in the house. They hung in large frames on the wall, stood on bedside tables, and were attached to magnets on the refrigerator. And at the same time, there were no photos of Amber in the apartment, as if the girl didn't live there. Amber became an independent child early on. As a result, as soon as she grew up a little, a lot of responsibility for her younger sister fell on her shoulders. She learned too early how to rock the baby to sleep during the day, put her on the potty, feed her, and take her for walks. Amber, being a good girl, still accepted this situation. It was difficult for her to be angry with her younger sister. However, Amber couldn't help but notice how different her sister's childhood was from hers. She remembered that her mother often yelled at her. No, she didn't raise her hand, but she put her in the corner or punished her for the slightest offence. Her little sister was allowed to do absolutely everything. Money was also a pressing issue in the house. Her mother was on maternity leave, her father was working, but he had no desire to sponsor his adopted daughter. So, when Amber stuttered that she needed to buy something for school, hand over money for a class trip, or would like to get something for herself, her mother always got furious. "You have excessive appetites, Amber," she scolded. "Go and earn it yourself if you need the money so badly. We don't have any extra money." In such moments, Amber had to go back to her teacher, blush and lie, saying that she wouldn't go to the theatre because she was very busy. At the same time, every time her 3-year-old sister pointed her finger at a toy in the store, it was instantly paid for and ended up in her eager little hands. If her mother brought home treats, she never offered them to Amber. All the chocolates, yogurts, and cookies went to the youngest. "You're already a big girl, Amber. You need to watch your figure, not eat sugar. Samantha is small. She has baby teeth, while you should save your teeth." Samantha was given the most beautiful clothes and allowed to get them dirty, which was considered adorable. In her childhood, Amber had to wear clothes from acquaintances, and even when the pants that she had survived 3 generations of children were torn, her mother looked at her dissatisfied. One day, Gloria came into her room and announced, "You will no longer be able to attend your painting classes," the woman stated categorically. Amber raised her head from the book she had been reading at that second and exclaimed in fright, "What? Why?" She loved her art school. There, the girl felt at home. "Because it's too expensive," explained her mother, examining the fresh manicure on her nails. "Samantha will go to a private kindergarten in September. We can't afford so many expenses." "But the school isn't that expensive." Amber was amazed. "A penny saved is a penny earned," her mother retorted in her own way. But you can send Samantha to a regular kindergarten, Amber suggested, grasping at straws. There's a great daycare centre near our house. My classmate's younger brother goes there. They say there's even a swimming pool. So you really want to send your younger sister to such a nursery school just to please yourself and your desires? I didn't expect such selfishness from you. Her mother shook her head, sighing. No, Amber, the subject is closed. Forget about your brushes. You won't become an artist. Think for yourself. All artists are hungry beggars. Do you want that? And anyway, instead of disappearing in the evenings on such a useless activity, you'd better help me at home. Prepare dinner, clean the apartment. If you haven't noticed, I already do all that, the girl flared up. And I walk with Samantha, and if you want to save money, you can stop dressing up the snotty girl in branded dresses, for example. Go to the salon less often for a manicure and pedicure. And I'm your daughter too, Mum. You have to take some responsibility for me. Of course, Amber quickly regretted her words. Not because she didn't think that way. Her words were sincere. However, the way Gloria's eyes narrowed frightened her to no end. How dare you talk to me like that, Amber? I gave you everything. I gave birth to you, didn't sleep at night, you're clothed, fed and shod, so you shouldn't shout at me. Ungrateful girl. Her mother grabbed whatever was at hand, Samantha's backpack, and threw it across the room, aiming for the head of her eldest daughter. Amber dodged, shocked at her enraged mother. Samantha came running from her parents' bedroom at the sound of shouting. She watched the events unfold with interest. Even then, Amber understood that the child wasn't afraid, just curious. Perhaps she even hoped that her older sister would be punished. When Samantha turned 6, she moved from her parents' bedroom to her older sister's room. For Amber, such cohabitation became a new circle of hell and a test of her nerves. The girl constantly took her things without asking. Coming home from school, Amber often found a mess in the common room. Samantha could cut Amber's favourite top with scissors, draw on her work notebooks with coloured markers, tear up books. I can't live in the same room with her. Amber could not stand it and said, looking at the destruction caused by her younger sister with tears in her eyes. She's doing it on purpose. Look at what she did to my notebook. There was a final essay due tomorrow. Now I'll have to write a new one at night. The girl waved scraps of the notebook. It looked as if a dog had torn her apart. At this time, cunning Samantha hid behind her mother's back. She peeked out from there with a mischievous expression on her face, perfectly understanding that she wouldn't be punished for this prank. You know what, dear? The mother said. If you don't want to share a room with your sister, then you can go work and rent your own place. You're already almost 18, Amber, so be independent. And while you live under my roof, so you have no right to complain. Amber had to remain silent, gritting her teeth in frustration. It only got worse. The girl often sat at her laptop to prepare for final exams. And of course, at such times, Samantha demanded that her sister give her the computer right now. I want to play games, the spoiled girl demanded. You're bothering me, Samantha. Amber waved her away, trying in vain to concentrate on the material she was reading on the screen. When I finish, I'll give you the computer right away. Play something else for now, with dolls, for example. I don't want to play with dolls. Samantha stamped her foot. I want to play on the computer. I want it now, right now. Go away, I said. The elder raised her voice. I told you I need to study. Faced with such a harsh response, the child immediately started crying. Her lips trembled, her hands shook and her face turned red. Mommy! She called out. Gloria rushed out of the kitchen, giving her daughters a stern glance. What happened again? "Amber, why is your sister crying?" "She wants the laptop and I have to study," Amber explained. "I'll give it to her when I'm done." "Just give it to her now, she's little," their mother snapped, wiping away the child's tears and snot with her hand. "You can sit later. For now, read your books. We didn't have computers in my day. We made do with the library." Amber tried to assert her right to use the laptop, but all her arguments fell on deaf ears. It was no surprise that by the time she graduated from school, Amber's fixed idea was to attend a university in another city, far away from her family. Time passed, and fortune finally smiled broadly and kindly on Amber. Her main dream came true. She was accepted into a university on a scholarship. Although calling Amber's enrollment in a prestigious university luck would be blasphemy, the girl had put too much effort into getting there. When Amber found out that she had been accepted, she felt dizzy with happiness. She ran into the kitchen where the whole family was gathered for dinner, her eyes sparkling with joy and the corners of her mouth stretched almost to her ears in a happy smile. "Mum, I got in. I'm going to study architecture, just like I've always dreamed. I told you I applied, remember?" she exclaimed. The mother only nodded, and a smile appeared on her lips only when Samantha chimed in. The girl refused the meatballs and was eating a sweet pie for dinner. "You're leaving, Amber?" she asked. "So I'll be living in your room, like a grown-up." Gloria laughed, patting her youngest daughter's dark curls just like her own. "Don't be in such a hurry to grow up, Samantha," Gloria said gently. "But yes, you'll be living alone." As the younger sister expressed her excitement with joyful squeals, Mum gave Amber a serious look. "You got a scholarship, right, Amber? We can't afford to pay for university. You understand that, don't you?" Amber, who just wanted someone to be happy for her and for once be praised for her success, felt deflated. Her shoulders drooped and her smile turned into a ghost of past joy. "Yes, Mum," she nodded uncertainly, shifting from her heels to her toes. "The dormitory is also covered, and there will be a scholarship. It's small, of course, but I think I can find a part-time job." "Of course, you'll have to work. Adult life is expensive," Mum said sternly. "We can't help you, Amber. Now Samantha goes to school and does gymnastics. We want to enroll her in singing, since she sings so beautifully." "But she used to go to art school," Amber replied absent-mindedly, not understanding how the conversation about her future had turned into her sister's skills. "Oh, you know, the teacher turned out to be so unpleasant." Mum waved her hand, making an annoyed face. "Samantha didn't like it there." Amber nodded, feeling lost. She knew that her sister changed sections every couple of months. But it wasn't the teacher's fault. It was the student's fault. Samantha hated obeying orders from others. She didn't know what discipline and subordination were. However, Gloria persistently dragged her from one activity to another, starting at age 3. So Samantha had tried Zumba, swimming, taekwondo, drawing, singing in a folk choir, etc. As Amber returned to her room, she couldn't help but think that her family didn't even invite her to the table. Her new life began in August, when she was warmly welcomed into the student dormitory. Of course, there were rules and problems. One of Amber's roommates, Hope, was quite a slob. Candy and chocolate wrappers that she had eaten could be found in the most unpredictable places. She could fall asleep with cookie and sandwich crumbs on her laptop keyboard. She could throw things on the floor or turn the music up so loud that the other residents of the dormitory would flock to the sounds of the disco like moths to a flame. However, what did Amber, who had spent several years in one room with a restless and mischievous younger sister, care about such trifles as a candy wrapper? Moreover, she found a common language with Hope, and they became good friends. Time passed quickly. Amber studied and worked. By the time she graduated from university, she had lost touch with her relatives completely. At first, Amber sent parcels with gifts to her hometown, but received a dry "thank you" in return. Gloria was not particularly interested in the fate of her eldest daughter. They called on holidays and then switched to sending greetings cards. The years at the university passed unnoticed. Freshly baked architects broke free, but they didn't know what to do next. Amber was luckier. She hit the bullseye on her first try. The girl knew what she wanted from her first year of study. Amber planned to go to Spain, so she sent a carefully crafted portfolio to Ricardo Garcia's architectural firm. She didn't really expect a response, and she was surprised when she received a huge letter asking her to start collecting documents for working abroad. Of course, Amber was taken on as an intern. She spent only 2 years in the beautiful country, but returned to her homeland as a new person. Amber was more confident than ever in herself and her abilities. And the internship at such a prestigious architectural firm and the recommendations of Ricardo Garcia became her business card. This was the beginning of a new stage in the girl's life. She got a job as an architect at a capital firm, starting her career. The talented girl quickly adapted to her new environment. She found many good and interesting people. Her life was full of surprises. However, life likes to turn things upside down. It was summer outside. Amber turned 30, and she invited her close friends to celebrate her birthday on Friday. It's not hard to guess that Saturday was tough for Amber. She and her friends had so much fun that her body now needed a full night's sleep, water, and a couple of aspirin. Amber planned to lie in bed until noon at least. She would only get out of bed to get something delicious and watch TV shows. But then the doorbell rang, interrupting her plans for a lazy weekend. At first, Amber thought the ringing was a dream. "Oh, who could it be?" the woman muttered, covering her head with a blanket. "No one is home." She hoped the person would leave her alone. However, the ringing continued. Then it started ringing non-stop as the persistent visitor held down the button. When someone started knocking on the door, Amber couldn't take it any more. She sighed discontentedly, threw off her blanket, and putting on her slippers, shuffled over to the door. Opening the front door, Amber yawned and stared at the guest. It was her younger sister. And not just one. Next to Samantha was a little girl, apparently her daughter. Amber knew that her younger sister had become a single mother, but she didn't go into the details. Amber had only seen her niece in photos on social networks. "Well, finally," Samantha exclaimed in annoyance, waving her hands. "I thought I'd have to spend the night in the entrance." Then she commanded the child, grabbing her hand. "Come in, Nikki. You'll meet your aunt in person. Her name is Amber." Chatting with the child, the sister pushed Amber with her shoulder and slipped inside. She dragged a large suitcase on wheels behind her. Amber looked at her younger sister in shock, wondering if she should pinch herself. "I must still be sleeping," thought Amber, in her hazy state of mind. Meanwhile, Samantha was already admiring the spacious hallway with a beautiful wardrobe. "Wow, you hit the jackpot, sis. The hallway is bigger than our bedroom. How much did this fancy apartment cost?" "How did you get here?" Amber answered with a question. Frankly, she had long forgotten that she had a sister or a family. Relatives didn't reciprocate with her. Amber wasn't even sure if her mother knew she was still alive. She still sent them cards and transferred money for holidays, but there was no response. And she certainly didn't expect to see her relatives on her doorstep. "You know how. I bought plane tickets, then took a taxi, and voila, we're here," she said to her sister, raising her eyebrows. "You don't seem happy to see us. And I brought you a niece, by the way. Maybe you could feed us after the trip?" Samantha hesitated for a long time, not revealing the true reason for her trip to Amber. However, after an hour, when they had their second cup of coffee, she gave in. "I have nowhere to live, Amber. Nikki's father left me. He was married, but he said he would leave his wife. Finally, when I got pregnant, he asked me to terminate it. I wanted to trick him into leaving the child so that he would stay with me, but eventually he got angry when he found out about my lie, and it was too late to get rid of the child at that time. "What about your parents?" Amber asked, knowing that Gloria and Thomas adored Samantha. "We argued," the brunette said, looking away. "I can't go back to them." "Okay, what do you want from me?" Amber asked, raising an eyebrow. "Shelter us for a while," the younger sister begged, grabbing Amber's hands and looking into her eyes devotedly. "You have a huge apartment, and Nikki and I don't need much space. I want to start a new life in the city. I'm studying to be a manicurist. I'll get a job in a salon. Here, the masters earn a lot. As soon as I'm on my feet, I'll leave right away. Please help us, sis." Amber sighed heavily. The prospect of sharing living space with Samantha again did not appeal to her. But how could she throw her out on the street? Especially since Amber felt sorry for Nikki, who had just turned 2 years old. She was quiet, silent, and had not spoken a word or made a sound the whole time. "Okay," she waved her hand. "But you're not here to stay permanently, Samantha. Find a job and rent a place." And so Samantha and Nikki occupied the living room, and the longer the sister lived with Amber, the more impudent she became. Without asking, she took her sister's perfumes and an expensive cream that her sister had received as a birthday gift. "Samantha, I thought you had grown out of this," Amber exclaimed, noticing the traces of her sister's interference in her personal space. "Oh, are you greedy for your face cream?" Samantha shrugged. "I left mine at home." "I don't mind, but it's unhygienic at least," the sister frowned. The same situation was with food. Samantha often stayed at home all day and ate all the food in the fridge. "Samantha," Amber tried to explain things to her sister, "if you want to eat something, please take care that the food doesn't run out. I come home from work late and I'm hungry too." "I didn't know you were so greedy, Amber." Samantha batted her eyelashes. "That's how the city spoiled you." Amber only sighed, realizing that it was pointless to explain the rules of basic etiquette to her spoiled sister. But the worst was yet to come. Amber soon realized that her younger sister was a lousy mother. She paid no attention to her child and only focused on her personal life. Sometimes Amber would come home and realize that the child had not been fed. At such moments, she quickly made some oatmeal or an omelette, which the child eagerly devoured. Samantha also didn't take her daughter for walks. Most of the time, the little girl sat alone, quietly playing with pots or jars. This whole picture struck a chord in Amber's heart. One day, Amber returned from work and saw Nikki sitting in the corner, quietly sobbing. As she approached, she felt an unpleasant smell. "Samantha, when did you change the baby's diaper?" the woman exclaimed, taking the child in her arms. "Listen, I don't remember," Samantha said, not looking up from her phone. "I just met a guy from the city on the app. If everything goes well, I'll become a—" Amber stopped listening to her sister's stories about her admirer. She took off the child's pants, which had become wet from the seeping moisture. The diaper was heavy and full. Nikki's buttocks were bright red and apparently sore. The little girl didn't cry, she just sniffled, clinging to Amber. The woman carefully washed her, wrapped her in a clean terry towel, the softest one they found in the house. "Why is Nikki still wearing diapers, Samantha? You should be teaching her to use the potty. Why aren't you spending time with her? The child is not developing. She doesn't know anything and can't do anything, and it's your fault." Samantha reacted to such accusations either with anger or tears. She always had excuses. Either it was hard for her to take care of the child alone, or she was too young for that. One day, Samantha begged Amber to come home early from work because she had a business meeting. When Amber arrived, Samantha was primping in front of the mirror, humming a popular hit tune. She wore her older sister's dress, and she smelled of her luxury perfume, which Amber saved and used only on special occasions. At first, Amber wanted to tell Samantha everything she thought of her audacity, but then she just shrugged. "I hope the meeting goes well," the woman remarked. "You've been living here for over a month, Samantha. It's time to get a job and a place to live." "Don't grouse," the brunette smirked, applying crimson lipstick. "What will you do when we leave? Will you miss Nikki? You spend all your time with her. You read books, play games, go for walks." "I spend time with her because I feel sorry for her." Amber frowned. "And by the way, why is she sleeping now? It's already evening." "What will she do at night?" "She's been lethargic all day and sleeping." Samantha waved her hand. "So you won't have any trouble with her." Approaching Nikki, Amber tenderly stroked her head. As soon as her fingers touched the girl's forehead, she gasped. "Oh, Samantha, Nikki's hot. Why are you just sitting there? We need to see the doctor." Samantha looked at her sister in surprise, then at her watch. "Amber, I'm going to be late. Can you handle this yourself, okay? I already have to run." Amber was in such shock that she didn't even yell at her sister. She couldn't understand how a mother could set her priorities like this, neglecting a child's health and not even noticing her condition. Nevertheless, Samantha left, and Amber had to take care of her niece alone. She arrived at the doctor, and he calmed Amber down a little. "The girl's lungs are good. You should have brought her temperature down earlier, of course. Her glands are inflamed. I'll prescribe a spray for treatment." Amber just nodded, listening to the doctor and holding Nikki close to her chest. She was anxious about the child at that moment. Samantha came home after a day. "I'm sorry," she smiled, appearing in the apartment. "I was held up." "Held up?" the older sister exclaimed. "Samantha, where were you? Interviews aren't conducted at night. I was actually thinking of starting to call police and hospitals." "Listen, Amber, you're not my mum. I had some fun. Michael invited me on a date and I went there right after the business meeting. Amber, I'm young. I can't just sit at home all the time like a prisoner." "You should. You should, and you will, because right now you don't belong to yourself." Amber was angry. "You have a child. She got sick, and she is your responsibility." Amber's words clashed against her younger sister's frivolity like peas against a wall. After 3 months of such a life, Amber realized that something had to change. "Samantha, I'm giving you a 2-week deadline. Either you find a job or you move back in with your parents. You're not living with me anymore," she said firmly. The ultimatum yielded results, but not what Amber had hoped for. One day she returned from work, carrying paper grocery bags in her hands, but the house was silent. Amber even wondered if her sister had gone out. But when she walked into the living room and flicked on the light switch, she saw Nikki, who had curled up on the couch. Her face and eyes were wet and red, as if she had been crying for a long time. But by the time Amber came, there were no tears left. "Nikki, where is Mummy?" Amber asked the child, approaching her. She found the answer on the table. Next to the empty vase there was a note, on which Samantha's handwriting was scrawled in curvy, sprawling handwriting. A message for Amber. "Amber, I'm sorry, but I've fallen in love and I can't stay here and bring up my daughter. I'm leaving with Michael for Bali. I've always dreamed of it. He doesn't know I have a daughter and I can't admit it. I can't waste my beauty and youth on raising a stupid child. Having Nikki was a huge mistake. I can't even look at her. She's a mute burden, and I sense she hates me too. I don't care if you throw her in the trash or give her to an orphanage." Amber read the note 3 times before she realized the meaning of her sister's terrible words. Her fingers shook with shock. She realized she was crying only when the tears rolled onto the paper, making the letters blurry with moisture. "Samantha, how could you?" she whispered in horror. She didn't mean herself, not at all. She felt so sorry for Nikki at that moment that her heart clenched to the point of pain. She turned around to look at the quiet little girl who had just been tossed into somebody else's nest by her cuckoo mother, flitting away. Suddenly, Amber crumpled the note in anger, throwing it to the floor. She walked over to the little girl, hastily wiping away her tears with the sleeve of her silk blouse, and asked with a gentle, encouraging smile, "Well, sweetie, how are you? Are you hungry?" Of course, Nikki did not answer. She stared blankly in front of her, as if she understood. Her mother had abandoned her. Swallowing the lump in her throat, Amber took the child in her arms. She chattered incessantly, talking to the girl about everything. Then she fed her, washed her, brushed her dark curls and braided them. That night she took the child to her bed. Until Nikki fell asleep, Amber told her stories. She herself did not sleep a wink. Heavy thoughts were weighing on her mind and soul. "I can't leave her," the woman thought, stroking her sleeping niece on her back. "I'm going on a business trip for a month in a week. Where am I going to leave her?" Later, Amber tried to call her mother, but the conversation was short. "Samantha did not listen to me. She gave birth to a married man. She's embarrassed us for the whole town, so let her handle the child herself," her mother said, hanging up the phone. A few days later, Amber took her niece to the orphanage. She hoped to explain the situation and maybe keep the child at the orphanage for a while. "I'll visit you often," she informed Nikki, who was sitting in the infant seat of her car. "Also, it will never be boring there. There are many children there. There are beautiful and interesting toys, and they always feed kids very well. You have such a good appetite. I think you'll be praised, honey." Amber parked her car next to the orphanage and looked at the building from the car's windshield. A minute later, she sighed and resolutely got out of the car. She swung open the passenger door and took Nikki in her arms. At the same time, Amber deliberately smiled, constantly telling herself how many good things awaited her in the new place. But no matter how cheerful her aunt's tone was, Nikki felt her uncertainty. The closer they got to the yellow-coloured building, the tighter the little girl clutched Amber. Then she sobbed sharply and clung to Amber's neck with her arms. Her face was pressed into her aunt's shoulder when the girl suddenly squeaked, quietly and inarticulately, "Mummy!" Amber froze on the porch of the orphanage. Her face was contorted with a grimace of pain. She clutched the girl tighter. "What? Nikki?" she whispered. "Mummy?" the girl repeated more clearly. Tears sprang from Amber's eyes. Mummy is the first word in the life of a child, usually, and it is so long awaited for loving parents. The fact that the girl gave this word to her and not to her own mother made Amber feel unbearably hard. She turned sharply on her heels and walked quickly back to the car. Amber drove away from the orphanage swiftly, as if she feared being caught up or changing her mind. And so Amber had a daughter, not a niece. Having arranged the necessary connections, Amber was able to get custody of Nikki. Samantha readily and even happily allowed it. Not all friends understood Amber's choice. "What a fool you are, Amber," said her colleague Dolores. "Of course you feel sorry for the child. I also feel sorry for the cats and dogs on the street, but if I bring them all home, what will come out of it?" "Don't compare my niece to a stray kitten," Amber frowned. "And I'm not comparing," Dolores waved her hand. "Just think about it. You're already 30. First you didn't build a personal life because you were busy with your career. And now what? Do you want to stay alone with a child in your arms? You don't have to be Mother Teresa and help everyone. You should help yourself. Do you need all these problems?" "Yes, I need," Amber categorically nodded, remembering Nikki's eyes. "If the man is decent and the other I don't need, then the child will not be a burden for him." Dolores only shook her head, sighing dejectedly. However, Amber was right. Soon a decent man appeared in her life, and she found him through Nikki. On the weekend, Amber took her adopted daughter to the park to feed pigeons and ducks. They also decided to have a picnic. The weather was beautiful. There were no clouds in the sky. The city was covered in a warm Indian summer. The trees stood green, not rushing to turn yellow and shed their leaves. The woman and the girl settled down on the grass under the shade of a spreading tree. They laid down a plaid blanket and took out some goodies from rustling bags. Amber involuntarily thought that she began to look at the world differently after being near a small child. Being a city resident and a career woman, she was always rushing to get somewhere. She always had a schedule and a clear plan for her life. She was forced to relax and go with the flow. Amber, however, surprisingly liked this change. While telling the child about the changes in nature, Amber noticed them herself. She learned to enjoy a sunny day, to rejoice in leisurely weekends, and to take joyful walks. When they were refreshed, Nikki began to run on the grass, throwing a small ball. Amber leaned back against a tree trunk, watching her daughter. She noted with amazement how quickly the girl had grown stronger. She began to walk and run confidently. Her cheeks rounded, became ruddy. Nikki talked a lot. Amber did not understand all the words, but she tried very hard to understand her little girl. Suddenly, Nikki laughed and pointed somewhere with her finger. Amber looked in that direction and immediately jumped up, seeing a huge Labrador. She liked pets, of course, but only if they were muzzled and leashed. The dog was well groomed, and its chocolate-covered coat glistened in the sun. Amber, however, tensed and immediately took the child closer to her. Nikki continued to point at the dog and demanded to stroke him. "Don't be afraid, he doesn't bite," said a child's voice cheerfully. Amber turned around, noticing a charming little boy. He looked about 5 or 6 years old, no more. "Is that your dog?" Amber smiled, still holding her daughter close to her. The boy nodded, looking proudly at the pet. "He was given to me by my dad when I was very young," he explained, adding, "I'm quite an adult, of course." Amber suppressed a smile, nodding seriously to the boy. Meanwhile, the boy called to the pet in a thin and sonorous voice. "Spike!" The dog rushed to his young master's voice. Noticing that the boy rubbed its ears and stroked its head, Nikki demanded to pet the dog even more. Looking hopefully at Amber and saying, "Mummy, please." Amber pressed her lips together. Every time the girl called her mummy, the woman's heart melted like ice cream in the sun. "Can we pet your friend?" she asked politely. The boy smiled broadly, nodding, "Of course." That's how Nikki got her hands on the pet. The dog waited patiently till the girl stroked it ineptly with her small palm. The Labrador sat with his tongue out and breathed noisily. Nikki laughed with delight and then hugged the dog, tucking her nose into its fur. "Nikki," Amber paled, who was already worried watching this picture. "Don't worry, Spike is the calmest dog in the world," said a pleasant baritone, "and he's very fond of children." A man stealthily approached them. And what a man! A blue-eyed blonde with a Hollywood smile. In a blue t-shirt and light jeans, he seemed to jump out of a popular melodrama, breaking a couple of women's hearts in the process. Amber looked away embarrassed, and then quickly pulled herself together and nodded to the man. "You know, judging by his size, he may like children for breakfast too," she joked back, still nervous about her daughter's safety. The blonde man chuckled briefly and walked over to the children and the dog. He squatted down and stroked the dog's side, saying, "When Josh was still a baby, Spike worked part-time for us as a babysitter. Whenever Josh whimpered in the cradle, Spike would jump up, rest his paws on it, and start rocking." "What a smart dog," Amber smiled, relaxing a little. "Your daughter is delighted." The man nodded at Nikki, who glowed with happiness when the dog licked her forehead. "Do you have any pets?" "No, unfortunately I don't have time," Amber responded, already imagining how she would try to cope with work, a child, and an animal. The man smiled softly. "Yes, that's what I thought too. I picked up Spike in the winter. Someone had thrown him out in the cold as a puppy, and he had a broken paw. Only later did I realize how lucky I was to have him. When a pet is around, a child doesn't feel lonely because he always has a friend. In addition, a pet is a kind of inoculation against selfishness, because a child can learn to care and look after someone other than himself." Amber had never thought of animals in this way. Rather, the presence of a dog in the house seemed to her, as hair in the corners, dirty paw prints and torn wallpaper. Listening to the stranger was pleasant. The warmth with which he spoke about the dog and then about his son resonated in Amber's soul. Amber did not notice how she and her new acquaintance settled down on her plaid. Amber offered him a seat on the blanket, and they both watched Josh and Nicky play with Spike. The children tossed Nicky's ball to the Labrador, and he brought it back to their feet, in his mouth. The man and woman got to talking. The stranger introduced himself as Paul, and he worked as a cook in a popular restaurant. Amber had time to note that there was no ring on the man's finger, and he did not mention his wife, talking about his life with his son. Soon, Paul himself said that he was a single father, without going into details. This fact made Amber even more interested in an attractive man. After all, she was just beginning to raise a daughter who had literally fallen on her head, while Paul had a lot of experience under his belt. While they were talking, they didn't notice how the weather had abruptly turned bad. The wind picked up, the sky was covered with clouds. A couple of moments later, the first large drops began to hit the ground. At first rare, they appeared more and more often, confidently turning into a downpour. To the squeals of the children, who were not in the least bit disappointed by this turn, the adults quickly gathered the plaid and the rest of the food. "I have a car at the park entrance. I'll give you a ride," the man shouted as they ran out of the park with the rest of the strolling crowd. "We live nearby," Amber responded. However, Paul insisted on his own. In turn, Amber strongly stated that he and Josh were obliged to stop by to dry off and drink hot tea so as not to get sick. Even though Amber saw Paul for the first time in her life, she felt something special inside her, the budding flame of falling in love. She couldn't ignore the fact that as soon as he smiled, butterflies began to flutter inside her, brushing against her ribs, tickling her from the inside out and making her smile back. The man and woman, having fed the children, cozied up in the kitchen. They drank more than one cup of tea, but both of them did not want to part, although Amber realized just one more drop, and she would simply burst. "Well, we've been here for a long time. It's time to go home," said the man, finally getting up from his seat. Amber looked away, not knowing what else to say. She didn't want to part with Paul. "The children are quiet," Amber commented worriedly, walking into the living room. "There's a proverb, when children stand quiet, they have done some harm. Do you think they have already painted your wallpaper, and I should allocate funds for repairs?" Paul asked cheerfully. There were no signs of mayhem in the living room, however. On the contrary, the children, exhausted by the fun day and the fresh air, were snoozing peacefully on the floor. Spike slept between Josh and Nicky, allowing them to cuddle him on either side. Someone, likely Josh, had thoughtfully covered them all the way with the same plaid blanket. The father and mother exchanged glances before tiptoeing out of the room. "Perhaps you should stay and let Josh rest," Amber suggested, unable to hide her joy. "If we're not disturbing," the man clarified softly. Amber shook her head. Neither Paul nor Josh, nor even Spike, bothered the woman or the girl that night, or in the following long years of their happy life together. Amber and Paul married a year after they met. Their decision did not seem hasty to them. They understood each other from half a word, complimented each other, and sincerely loved each other. Paul accepted Nicky as his own, even after learning the true history of the girl. Amber, on the other hand, tried her best to become a mother to Josh. It turned out that Josh's mother had died during childbirth. The large family moved into a new house with a backyard where Spike could frolic. Josh fulfilled the role of an older brother, teaching Nicky to ride a scooter or bicycle. Next to her new family, the girl opened up and came alive. Amber thought of her as a flower that had been forced to endure drought and live among the weeds for so long, and was finally able to enjoy the rays of the sun, drink rainwater and open her petals. Amber was so happy that sometimes she was afraid to wake up and realize that everything that was happening was just a dream. Her life could not have turned out more beautifully. Amber had a particular strategy in raising both children. She praised them for all their endeavors, rejoiced at any success, even the most insignificant, supported their every step and hobby. She never missed an event, neither in kindergarten nor in school. She shared her love equally, trying not to deprive either of the children. This is how Amber realized the meaning of the phrase, "There is no such thing as other people's children." After all, both Josh and Nikki were hers. Josh had been swimming since he was 6 years old. He had inherited this passion from his father, who, in his youth, had even been a member of the swimming team. Nikki, on the other hand, was not particularly eager to do sports. The girl liked to draw more, so she was sent to art school at the age of 5. "You, Nikki, will probably become like me, an architect or designer, maybe even an artist," Amber smiled when her daughter showed her drawings. But Nikki, trying to imitate her brother in everything, declared, "I want to be like Josh." To become such a naughty child, you have to try very hard. Paul laughed, while Josh snorted like a disgruntled hedgehog. Everything changed when Nikki attended Josh's first competition. The girl was 7 years old and Josh was already 10. Before that, he had been practicing swimming for his own pleasure, but lately ambition had begun to show in the young man. He wanted to receive medals for his achievements. Nikki sat between her parents, all on pins and needles. When Josh beautifully dived into the water on the whistle, the girl jumped up and squeezed her eyes shut with excitement for her favorite brother. The next second, however, she opened them, afraid of missing something. "Mummy, how fast he swims!" "Like a fish," the girl exclaimed admiringly, watching the splashes left behind by the young athlete. The first swim was not a failure. Josh received a medal, second place, and a silver medal. Nikki jumped up, applauding her brother so hard that her palms turned red. The competition and Josh's success made such a deep impression on the girl that she also expressed a desire to try herself as a swimmer. Her parents did not take her request seriously, deciding that it was made on emotion, but they enrolled her in the pool. After all, swimming lessons were extremely useful. Only Nikki surprised everyone, even her coach. "Your daughter has a real talent, a natural ability to swim," she said when the girl had been in the pool for only a year. "Nikki feels like a fish in the water. Have you ever thought of sending her to a sports school?" The parents listened to the coach's words and, after discussing everything with their daughter, decided they would raise an athlete. Within 2 years of lessons, the child confidently mastered all the necessary swimming styles, including breaststroke, backstroke, and butterfly. At the age of 15, Nikki began competing in international competitions. They wrote about her in the newspaper, titling the article, "If we need a golden youth, then only someone like her." The journalist's words describing Nikki made Amber feel an unprecedented sense of pride. With tears of happiness in her eyes, the woman cut out the article and added it to a memorable album. Both her father and older brother were proud of her success. When Nikki was asked about what helped her reach such heights as a young age, the girl answered, "My parents and older brother. Of course, the coach was the driving force that forced me to move forward, but my mum was the person who supported me along the way." Nikki smiled and added, "My mum is an angel." On the wave of fame, Nikki began receiving various invitations from the media and magazines. By the age of 17, she was even appearing on magazine covers and in advertisements for sportswear, showcasing her abilities as a model. Probably, rumours about the girl reached the island of Bali, or another corner where Samantha lived at the time. Nikki's natural mother easily found her address. When she appeared on the doorstep of Amber's house, all members of the family were gathered. It was summer, and the calendar showed a long-awaited day off. The family members settled in the backyard. Paul was grilling kebabs for dinner, and Amber was setting the table under the roof of the patio. Paul had built this patio by his own hands, and he was very proud of it. Josh was sunbathing with his girlfriend Molly. Both students had closed their session at the university a week ago, so they deserved a vacation. Josh did not connect his life with swimming, but to the surprise of all family members, He entered the architectural school. Amber supported him. Besides, she still had the right connections, so she was able to help her son. Recently, they took a new dog, also a Labrador, but this time black. Jack was chasing a butterfly, doing pirouettes, bouncing and clacking his teeth, trying to catch it in mid-air. Spike, who in a way united the family, died of old age. They grieved for him greatly, but consoled themselves with the fact that the dog had lived a long and honourable life. Only Nikki was missing in the backyard. The girl, who had been sunbathing and gossiping with Molly and her brother, received a phone call. The girl blushed and, apologising, ran into the house. Amber couldn't help but notice how her daughter's voice changed when she said into the receiver, "Hi, oh," and the happy smile on the girl's face could not be ignored either. Amber crept up to her husband from behind, tugging him. "I think Nikki has fallen in love," she whispered. "Yes?" Paul immediately tensed up, looking anxiously at the door, behind which her daughter had disappeared. "She's still a little girl. And when could she fall in love if she's in the water all the time?" Amber burst out laughing. "She'll be 18 soon, Paul," she reminded her husband. "That's what I mean, she's still a child," the man continued to grumble, turning the flavourful meat on the skewers. Amber shook her head, smiling. "Of course, for you, your daughter will always be a child, even when she goes to the altar." "What altar, Amber?" The husband theatrically clutched at his heart. "Stop scaring me, okay?" The woman laughed. Standing on tiptoe, she kissed the man on the chin, overgrown with 2-day stubble. The slight beard suited him just fine, though. At that moment, she turned her head, and the smile slowly began to slip from her face. Amber furrowed her eyebrows and squinted, as if she thought her eyesight was failing her. It couldn't be her little sister standing in the yard of the house, could it? However, this mirage was soon noticed by the rest of the family. "Hello," the owner of the house spoke first. "Who are you?" Samantha took an uncertain step towards her sister. "Hi, Amber. Your gate was open. I heard the music and the dog and realised that you were here." Amber frowned even more. Her husband saw that his wife turned pale, and her fingers clenched into fists. "What are you doing here, Samantha?" she asked gruffly. "Have you had your fun, or did you bring another child to me?" Even Amber had not expected to hear such harsh words from herself. However, it was only when she saw her younger sister's tanned face that she realised how angry she was with her. Not because she had dumped the baby on her, but because she had abandoned her daughter, a tiny, defenceless creature. "Why are you speaking with me like that?" Samantha whimpered in her usual tone of voice. "I came to ask for your forgiveness. I realised many things during this time. I was young and stupid then, but I want to see my daughter." "Oh, I'm sure you've already seen her," Amber retorted. "On TV, for example? That's why you came back, isn't it? What attracted you, Samantha? Your daughter's career? Maybe because she's popular and makes good money, or the chance to give an interview or appear on a TV show. Be honest." Samantha tightened her lips, as if her sister's words had hurt her deeply. "How could you think that about me?" The woman sobbed angrily. "You're wrong. It's just that I've realised many things during this time. I want to see Nikki, and you cannot forbid me. I am her mother." Before Amber's eyes, it was as if a red veil had descended. For a moment she thought that if she had one of the skewers in her hand, she would have thrown it at her sister like a spear. "What am I supposed to think? That you missed her? I'm sorry, darling, but you've been away for over 15 years, and you cannot, you have no right, to come into my house to claim any rights over my daughter. Do you hear? She is my daughter." Amber only realised that she had begun to lash out threateningly at her sister when Samantha started to back away. The younger sister looked up into the older one's face with amazement and consternation. She had never encountered such a reaction from the sensible and kind Amber. "Mum!" The two women heard the girl's voice and turned in the direction of the sound. "What's going on here?" Nikki froze on the threshold with the phone in her hand. She looked from Amber to Samantha and back again. "Nikki!" Samantha rushed to her before Amber could stop her. "Nikki, my daughter!" The girl didn't even have time to recoil, but her biological mother was already hugging her. Samantha cried, holding Nikki close to her. "Honey, forgive me if you can," she begged the girl. "I realize what a monstrous mistake I have made. But I've paid for it, my darling. Not a day goes by that I don't think of you. I have no happiness in my life. No family or loved ones are left. I have wanted to come back to ask for your forgiveness, but I was ashamed to look into your eyes, daughter." Amber, boiling with rage, wanted to approach her sister, to unhook her from her daughter. Anger and fear rose inside her. She was afraid that Samantha could take away her daughter. Her husband touched her shoulder, reassuring her and holding her in place. "Your sister is already here," the man said softly. "Whatever's supposed to happen, let it happen." Amber pressed her lips together, anxiously watching the events unfold. She didn't realize when Josh and Paul stood at her sides, as if protecting her. "I don't hold a grudge against you," Nikki said calmly. "They say that only happy people do not hold grudges and do not bear grudges. You know, I'm delighted, even though you tried to achieve the opposite." "I've never—" Samantha began to cry, tears welling up in her eyes. Nikki shook her head and carefully released herself from Samantha's arms. She took a step away from her and said, "Mummy never hid the truth about you. I used to wonder what I would say if I met you. All sorts of angry and hurtful thoughts came into my head, but they all evaporated, as if those feelings had a shelf life that had long since expired. Now, I guess what I want to say to you is, thank you." Nikki paused for a moment, as if weighing her decision. Then she nodded decisively and said, "Yes, I am grateful to you for being a bad mother. If all this hadn't happened, if you had left me with you, where would I be now? Probably not at the top of the pedestal, that's for sure. Because you never believed in me." "That's not fair," Samantha shouted. "I saw the note you left before you left me," Nikki said sternly. "You offered to throw me in the trash because I didn't speak. And which one of us was being unfair?" Amber was aghast, covering her mouth with her hand. She had no idea her daughter had found that ill-fated piece of paper. Back then, Amber, after crumpling up her sister's note, straightened it out again and put it back into the folder with the letters and documents. She had no hidden agenda. She just decided to always remember that her sister was an unworthy person. But she didn't know the burden her daughter lived with. Amber's eyes filled with tears. "I was young and foolish, but the important thing is to admit your mistakes, isn't it?" Samantha continued to justify herself. "You can't imagine how difficult it was for me alone with a child in my arms. Anyway, I am your mother." "I only have one mother," Nikki stated categorically, "and it's definitely not you. And you're lucky that my mum raised me well enough that I didn't set a dog on you right now." Josh snorted with laughter and said, "You know, I was raised by my father, not by my mum until I was 5. I can afford to take some liberties. Jack, come here, boy." The Labrador, wagging his tail happily, came running at his master's voice. Samantha blushed with anger, eyeing the dog warily. "If you think I'm going to leave it like that," Samantha tossed to her sister before walking away. "Do you really have a choice?" Amber snorted. An hour later, all the family were sitting at the table. Despite her smile, Amber was shaking inside. Her sister's appearance had knocked her out of her rut. She was brought out of her pensive state by the light touch of her daughter's hand. Amber looked at Nikki, smiling, and said, "Mum, I love you. Thankful that I have you." Amber wanted to answer that she too loved her daughter endlessly, was proud of her, that the greatest happiness in the world was to be her mum, but she couldn't open her mouth because her throat was full of tears. Tears of happiness. Sometimes Amber was asked if she wished she had natural children, At such moments, Amber looked at those people with sincere incomprehension and said, "But I have my natural kids." And there was not a drop of falsity in her words. They were sincere and coming from the heart of a true mother. At 80 years old, Mrs. Carr was still a pretty lively elderly lady. She lived independently in a small house on the outskirts of a working settlement. She had flowers in her yard and lace curtains on the windows, and everywhere there was beauty and order. Some young people never keep their surroundings as clean and tidy as Mrs. Carr does. In the morning, neighbours often woke up, and Mrs. Carr was already watering the garden beds. At night, they went to sleep and heard how Mrs. Carr was still sweeping the already perfect pathway with a broom. She was a kind and good-natured old lady. All the children in the settlement loved her very much. They sometimes play nearby, and Mrs. Carr would come out to sit on the bench on the street and watch how the kids had fun. Another person would yell at the children for disturbing the peace of the people, but Mrs. Carr just smiled. Then she would call the kids over. She would give them candy or bring out some hot pies from home. The children were happy, and the elderly lady was happy too. That's how everyone was happy. Adults also respected Mrs. Carr for her good nature and her past. After all, she knew practically half of the locals. Mrs. Carr worked all her life as a nanny at a kindergarten. There had never been a more caring and kind nanny than her. The kids would run to the kindergarten just to meet Mrs. Carr. She would hug them, play with them, and wipe their noses if needed. However, Mrs. Carr's fate was not easy. She grew up as an orphan. She did not receive a decent education, so she became a nanny at a kindergarten. She met her husband when she turned 20. Ben carried her in his arms, and they loved each other very much. But then Ben died. He was electrocuted at an electrical plant where they were installing new equipment, and the specialists didn't pay attention to something. Mrs. Carr was 6 months pregnant at that time. Oh, how she cried for Ben. And then her daughter was born. She devoted all her love to her only daughter, Mary. She never got married again, although there were crowds of admirers who came to her. Mrs. Carr rejected all of them, and then all the admirers somehow disappeared. Her daughter grew up, became a teacher, got a job in the capital, and got married there. Mrs. Carr was left alone. A decade passed, then another and another. But the old lady didn't despair. She enjoyed every day and appreciated this life, because she knew from experience how fragile it could be. Her daughter and her family came to visit her every year, and in recent times they always invited her to live with them. "Mum," Mary would persuade the old lady, "why do you sit here? The house is old, and it's lonely here for you. And what kind of medicine is here? God forbid that you have an attack. You won't get an ambulance." "You can't live 2 lives anyway," Mrs. Carr would wave her hand and say, "I won't leave my Ben. Your dad here. Put me next to him." "Oh, Mum, why do you speak about death?" Mary would get angry and say, "Live to be 100 or even more. Your grandson got married, and before you know it, your great-grandson will be born. And you're talking about death. Stop it, please." So Mary, as always, was left with nothing. And then something bad happened. People were struck by a new virus. They got sick and died. It was scary. So Mrs. Carr caught this illness somewhere. They took the old lady to a hospital, which was located in the neighbouring district. And there, Mrs. Carr fully experienced how vulnerable people can be. It was heartbreaking to see how medics fight for the lives of young and old people, and how often they lose. What can they do? The doctors themselves still didn't know how to treat it. Nevertheless, Mrs. Carr managed to recover. But there was little joy in it. It was there in the hospital that she had a stroke, whether it was from the illness or from her age. They treated the elderly woman briefly and sent her back to another hospital, lying down. There she received the required care, but she did not fully recover and spoke with difficulty. So, where could she be sent? Her relatives would have taken her, but they lived far away. The hospital had its rules. If you've been in the hospital for the prescribed period of treatment, please vacate the bed. The treating doctor was also concerned. What if the elderly lady, Mrs. Carr, got bed sores? The staff would be penalised. The daughter knew about her mother's condition, but she couldn't help. She herself had barely recovered from that virus and could barely walk to the toilet along the wall, so to speak. Her husband didn't survive the disease. He passed away. The grandson was eager to go to his grandmother, but he was the only helper at his home. Mary needed help, and his wife Elizabeth was 8 months pregnant. Where could he leave her? In general, the situation was terrible. He started begging for help, to deliver his grandmother home and to provide a nurse. He would pay for everything. And as soon as his mum gets better and his wife gives birth, he will come and pick her up. Social services promised to help, but how? All caregivers were busy all day, so they didn't have free hands. And then chance helped. A new employee came to work, who used to work as a caregiver in the regional centre. So they offered this woman, whose name was Anna Maria, to take care of Mrs. Carr. Especially the relatives would not skimp on payment. Anna Maria agreed. They transported Mrs. Carr to her native home and put her in bed. The doctor handed the caregiver a list of medicines that the elderly woman needed and promised to check in soon. So Mrs. Carr stayed with Anna Maria. Anna Maria was already 50 years old, a large and strong woman for whom taking care of bedridden patients was easy. And what was there to bother with Mrs. Carr? In short, the caregiver had to bathe and dress the elderly woman, give her medication, and prepare broths and other suitable food for her. At first, the neighbours often peered in and saw that the house was in order and Mrs. Carr was well groomed. Everyone calmed down. The care for the elderly woman was superb. The neighbours called Seth and reassured him. It was a pity, of course, that Mrs. Carr had been sick so severely, but what can you do? It's a miracle that she survived after that awful virus and stroke. A month passed. Seth called regularly, inquiring about his grandmother. Anna Maria reported in detail what Mrs. Carr ate, what medicines she took, and what exercises she did. Seth was delighted. His grandmother had an excellent caregiver. "Can you take care of her until spring?" Seth asked once. "You understand, my wife just gave birth. The baby was born weak and I need to help Elizabeth. And my mother is not recovering from her illness yet. She's weak, to my horror. Now she has been sent to a sanatorium. I hope she gets better." "Don't worry," Anna Maria reassured him. "I will take care of Mrs. Carr for as long as necessary." "Thank you." The grandson sincerely thanked her and said goodbye, and every month he transferred a predetermined sum of money to the caregiver. Another month passed and the neighbours began visiting less often, asking Anna Maria more about how Mrs. Carr was doing. Anna Maria said that there were no changes, but the neighbours saw it for themselves. The poor elderly woman was always asleep when they came. "She's dried up like a child." "Has the doctor been here?" the neighbours asked worriedly. "He is keeping track of her condition over the phone," Anna Maria replied, "but he doesn't come home," explaining that now they have a big workload because of this virus. And it's understandable. What can you do to help Mrs. Carr? It's better to help those who can still be helped. "Yes," the neighbours sighed, "that's life, and it seems like they pulled her out of that world. But what's the use? She lies like a doll." "Everyone has their own fate," Anna Maria agreed. The neighbours liked Mrs. Carr's caregiver more and more. She was so efficient. In the fall she cleaned everything in the yard, and in the house she constantly cleaned, as if doing it for herself. She wasn't talkative, only said what was necessary, and didn't spread any gossip. She didn't tell anyone the details of taking care of Mrs. Carr. Why did people need to know how she washed and fed her? It was all very personal. Mrs. Carr was lucky to have a caregiver. However, Anna Maria did not talk much about herself either. People only knew that she came to the village from the city, rented an apartment there, and got a job at a store at first. And then she moved in with Mrs. Carr. She had children and a husband, but no one knew anything about them. Anna Maria tried to avoid discussing certain topics. Over time, people understood that it was unpleasant and maybe painful for her, so they stopped asking questions. However, the terrible truth was eventually revealed. There was a new therapist in the settlement. Dr. Tobin had recently graduated from medical school and was eager to save people. She had trouble finding work in the city, so she went to the countryside under the Rural Doctor program. Dr. Tobin enjoyed the village and had a comfortable apartment and a good salary. However, the complete chaos in the clinic with patients' documents confused her. Some patients' cards had not been opened for years. Something was constantly lost, and sometimes the test results were unbelievable. Dr. Tobin realized that it would not be easy for her. She was also outraged by the superficial attitude towards patients who needed constant observation. Her nurse was surprised. Why bother to see such patients every week? They would die anyway. Of course, not everyone had such an attitude, but those who could not defend themselves were treated that way. Among such patients, Dr. Tobin found Mrs. Carr's medical history. That evening after work, she went to visit her patient. Perhaps Anna Maria simply forgot to close the front door on that winter evening. Dr. Tobin timidly entered the porch, approached the inner door, and was about to knock when suddenly she heard Anna Maria's quiet but threatening voice. "You're so annoying to me, you old fool!" The doctor raised her eyebrows in surprise and cautiously opened the door, walked into the hallway, stopped at the bedroom door, and heard the further conversation. "Daughter," a weak, elderly voice was barely audible. "Give me a little piece of bread, I'm so hungry." "You'll be fine without it," the mocking female voice answered her. "I don't want to change your diaper again. Did you eat your oatmeal this morning?" "Yes, you did. That's enough for you." "There were only 2 spoons there." "How much did you want? You're not entitled to more. Do you think I'm going to clean up the mess from under?" "Anna Maria, why are you like this? Let me call my daughter or grandson." "Look at you. Did you think of calling them? Have you lost your mind? So, I'll get back on track quickly. Now, you'll drink a sleeping pill and you'll be like silk. Come on, open your mouth." "Anna Maria, my dear, don't. I won't call, I won't complain. Just don't take these pills, they make me feel worse." "And it will only get worse if you don't sign the paper. I told you, everything depends on you. You'll give me a house, and you'll have food and a bath every day. If you'd like, I'll even read poems and sing songs for you after that." The woman laughed mockingly, and then there was some commotion. Dr. Tobin could not stay on the sidelines anymore. She stepped decisively into the room and asked sternly, "What's going on here?" At the bedside of the elderly woman stood a plump woman, apparently the caregiver, Anna Maria, about whom Dr. Tobin was told by social services when she was inquiring about Mrs. Carr. At that moment she was trying to give the unfortunate patient some murky liquid to drink, and the elderly woman was clenching her lips with the last of her strength. Hearing a stranger's voice, Anna Maria groaned and then, slowly straightening up, turned to the doctor. "And who are you?" she asked gruffly. "Why did you come in without knocking?" "I'm the local therapist. Your door was open," Dr. Tobin answered calmly. "Please explain what you were doing just now." "We're taking medicine," Anna Maria replied without blinking. "I don't know what your colleagues prescribed, so I give what they prescribed. I dissolve it in water to make it easier for her to swallow." Anna Maria handed over several blister packs with tablets. Dr. Tobin read the names, but there was nothing suspicious there. And then she looked at the elderly woman. She was looking at her without turning away. There was pain, a plea, and horror in her eyes. The unfortunate woman had no strength left to say anything. "I heard a strange conversation," the doctor said, turning her gaze from the elderly woman to the caregiver. "Please explain." "What conversation?" The caregiver widened her eyes. "You imagined it." "Oh, that's enough. Have you seen the patient? She's alive. She's receiving treatment. Make a note that you visited us and that's it. We have no complaints about you." "I haven't even begun examining the patient," Dr. Tobin replied firmly and stepped towards the bed. As she made her way, a nurse loomed over her like a mountain. "I take good care of Mrs. Carr," she said threateningly. "I treat her and measure her blood pressure. Why do you need to watch her? Doctor, go home. You must be tired after a day's work." "In that case, I'll call the police," Dr. Tobin replied, fearlessly meeting Anna Maria's gaze. The nurse's face changed. She groaned and then darted out of the room like a bullet. A minute later, Dr. Tobin heard the front door slam. "Well, never mind, we'll figure it out," she said primarily to herself, approaching the bed. "Let's see how you are." The doctor threw off the covers and froze in horror. A real skeleton lay on the bed, covered in skin. It was clear that the elderly woman was not getting enough food, and the care was, to put it mildly, subpar. Stale bedding, rashes on her skin, and bed sores in some places. Dr. Tobin immediately called an ambulance and the police. It was evident that the elderly woman was in critical condition. So Mrs. Carr was once again admitted to the therapeutic department. But now she was given special care. The doctors, including the chief physician, felt guilty for losing the patient and now tried to make up for it. In addition, a ministerial inspection thundered through the hospital a week after all the events. The chief physician immediately lost his position, and his deputies were also removed from their posts. Now the hospital was in perfect order. Local patients were only surprised at how attentive and responsive their doctors had become. Dr. Tobin, the young doctor, was glad too. Now she worked in an excellent hospital. On the first evening, the police rushed to search for the fugitive nurse. They caught her trying to escape on a train. Anna Maria was a professional swindler. She had already made a name for herself in several cities. She usually took care of the elderly and lonely people, and then made them sign over their property to her. When they died, she sold the apartments. If the old people resisted, she set up a real concentration camp for them. She acted very sly, and people around her didn't even suspect what this beast in a woman's guise was doing. She killed 3 old men in different cities, and there were 10 elderly people under her care at different times. The money from the sale of their apartments was in Anna Maria's account. She came in this village to take a break and lie low for a while. In one of the cities, unexpectedly, there was a hitch. The son came to his father from the north and saw that he was almost dead. Anna Maria barely got away then. What saved her was that the old man and his son didn't see her documents, but the desire for profit was stronger than Anna Maria, and so she quickly found herself a victim in the village. Everything went according to the usual script. On the outside, a caring nurse, but in reality, a ruthless criminal who barely fed, washed and drugged the old woman with sleeping pills to keep her quiet. Why did she act so brazenly? Wasn't she afraid of being exposed? After all, doctors and social workers would come. From her experience, Anna Maria knew that no one needed such old people. When employees came to check, it was enough to look from afar and talk to neighbours. They even warned about their visits in advance, but this time things didn't go according to Anna Maria's plan. She was judged and given several years in prison. What about Mrs. Carr? The elderly woman had been recovering in the hospital for many months, but finally she began to get better. Social services tried to clear their name and find a place for Mrs. Carr in a good nursing home that specialised in stroke patient rehabilitation. She spent almost 3 months there, and by spring she was able to walk out of the nursing home on her own 2 feet. Her daughter and grandson were waiting for her at the entrance. Mary had recovered too, Seth's little boy had grown stronger, and he could leave his wife and child for a while, so the two of them came to their mother and grandmother. They were shocked when they found out about the conditions Mrs. Carr lived in. They thought they had entrusted their loved one to a professional, kind-hearted woman, who, by the way, received a generous reward from them. Instead, they almost killed Mrs. Carr at the hands of this monster. "Now, Mum, without discussion, you're coming with us." Mary said it firmly. "We won't leave you alone in these parts for a second any more." "Yes, Grandma, we need you," Seth agreed. "Your great-grandson will start walking soon. How can he do without you?" "Yes, childcare is needed," Mrs. Carr smiled and said, "But who will take care of me now? I need someone to take care of me too." "And you'll take care of each other," Mary laughed, "and we'll take care of you too." "What about Ben here alone? We should lie together." "Mum," Mary frowned, "when the time comes we'll put you next to Dad. But for now, live as long as God gives you, and make us happy. It's not easy for me after my husband's death either, but we have you, Seth, Tommy and Elizabeth. They are our family." "Yes, family is the most important thing," Mrs. Carr agreed. Before leaving for the city, they visited the settlement, tidied up everything in the house, locked the door, and gave the keys to the neighbours. They volunteered to take care of the sale. If it works out, great, and if not, well, so be it. The neighbours were ashamed of what had happened to Mrs. Carr too. They didn't take care of her. They relied on a stranger, and now they were trying to help as much as they could. Mrs. Carr left for the city with her daughter and grandson. Sometimes she calls her former neighbours and tells them that she lives on the 10th floor, like in a birdhouse, she jokes sadly. Yes, she misses the village, but where is she now without her great-grandson? He is her most precious child. All the fairy tales, songs and affection of Mrs. Carr, only for him. Since then, the house on the outskirts of the settlement has been abandoned. No more lace tulle in the windows. No more kind old woman sitting on the bench, spoiling the local kids. But the neighbours carefully watch over the estate. They remove the weeds and make sure no one misbehaves in the house. And no one would even think of doing that, because even the most inveterate hooligans in the settlement remember that the kindest elderly woman in the world lived there. How could they do anything bad to her? And maybe one day she will come back, and then the house and the estate will light up from the love and warmth emanating from Mrs. Carr herself. Michelle sighed heavily as she looked out of the window at the unpleasant drizzle outside. It was the end of July, which should have been at least hot, if not clear and sunny. The girl turned to look at the round wall clock. The hands inexorably approached 6 in the morning, which meant it was time to leave the house to catch the bus. While she could hide under the rain from an umbrella, there was nowhere to hide from the greyness of her weekdays and her gloomy mood. Michelle took another sip of cold coffee and, quickly rinsing the cup, headed for the exit. The door creaked in one of the rooms, and then there was the sound of shuffling steps. "Michelle, are you leaving already?" Grandma asked her granddaughter, coming out into the corridor. The elderly woman squinted from sleep while buttoning her home dress, which Michelle had given her as a gift on her birthday last year. Mrs. Blount had long been retired and was busy with household chores. After the accident that happened to Michelle and Kevin's parents, Grandma immediately seemed to grow old at once, became ill frequently. "Yes, Granny, I'm almost gone," the girl replied from the hallway, already putting on her old leather jacket.
"Did you eat at least, or as usual?"
The old woman frowned, crossed her arms over her chest, and watched her granddaughter put on sneakers. "I ate, Grandma, honestly," the girl replied out of habit, thinking that calming her grandmother down is definitely a lie for. "Today we have a wedding at the hotel, a banquet for 100 people. Maybe I'll bring you and Kevin something tasty." The old woman just waved her hand as if to say, "Don't talk nonsense." Mrs. Blount was a woman of old-fashioned beliefs. She firmly believed that everything Michelle brought home from work, apart from her salary, was theft. Michelle just laughed in response and asked, "Well, the police won't come to us because of 2 sandwiches, will they?" Grandma just frowned, raising her eyebrows. Mrs. Blount used to work as an accountant in a kindergarten where everything was strictly accounted for, and although she coped well with her work, once she crossed the retirement age, she was asked to give way to the young. She tried to find another job, but encountered a series of refusals. No one wanted to hire a woman of such venerable age, even with rich experience. The woman tried to help her small family by using various side jobs. But more nerve calls went away than money appeared in her wallet, and her granddaughter was categorically against these, as she called them exploits. Michelle ordered her grandmother to retire, as is customary for women of her age, and at 22, she took full financial responsibility for their family. Don't forget that you don't need to take Kevin to kindergarten today. They are in quarantine because of chickenpox. The girl reminded her younger brother for the last time. Don't wake him up, let him sleep. After receiving a kiss on the cheek and a customary farewell from her grandmother, the girl jumped into the dark entrance, then onto the wet street. She was sure that her deeply religious grandmother crossed her back with a cross when she went out the door. Michelle worked as a maid at a prestigious, incredibly popular hotel. It was not yet possible to apply for any other position, such as an administrator. To achieve this, special education in the hotel business sphere was required. It was this profession that the girl tried to get by studying part-time. In secret, the girl dreamed of opening her own cozy hotel, one in which she could work and live with her grandmother and Kevin instead of their old 2-room apartment. Michelle was satisfied with her job. First and foremost, of course, the high salary was pleasing, and the hotel guests were wealthy people who often left generous tips for the young maid. Politicians stayed here, businessmen arranged conferences, celebrities were here, or famous people with unknown mistresses and lovers were lurking. The last ones always left more tips than anyone else, probably as a payment for silence. In addition, Michelle appreciated the convenient schedule and the possibility of substituting for other girls in emergencies. However, the job was tough, and every penny had to be earned through physical and moral labour. Not all guests were friendly, nor was all the staff responsive. It was here that Michelle's iron nerves came in handy, along with her good-natured character, which allowed her to remain calm in particularly unpleasant situations. For example, the situation with the ubiquitous manager Greg Miller was one such case. He wandered around the hotel like an unbridled flea, trying to bite Michelle as hard as he could, and now, as soon as the girl crossed the threshold of the common dressing room, he quickly entered. "Good morning, Michelle," Mr. Miller almost sang, passing by the girl and lightly, amicably touching her back. However, this movement momentarily froze the girl, who was standing by her locker. "Hello, Mr. Miller," she muttered. "Why so formal? We're alone here," the boss ambiguously replied. "Change into your uniform quickly. The working day is about to begin. I don't want to dismiss you, although sometimes I do." The man chuckled unpleasantly. At the same time, he pretended to be looking for something in his locker. There was no doubt about it. He came here purposefully to watch the maid. Michelle gritted her teeth, clenching them tightly so as not to let a harsh word slip out towards her boss. And there was plenty to swear about. From the first day of their acquaintance, the young maid, with her wheat-coloured hair, cinnamon-coloured eyes, and a scattering of light freckles on her nose, had captured the heart of the manager. But instead of inviting Michelle on a date, getting rejected, and calming down, the slippery man began to pressure the girl through his high position. He constantly hinted at Michelle, tried to hug her whenever possible, and stroked her back or knee. Once he even slapped her below the belt, accompanied by an indecent remark about the length of her uniform skirt. The girl learned to endure such treatment and the attention of the manager. What else could she do? Hit him in his impudent, annoying face and then count pennies? No, Michelle was afraid of losing her job. And even though being a maid was not the most prestigious profession, she didn't want to work as a cashier for a salary 3 times lower. She wanted to please her little brother with modern toys and buy her grandmother a new dress. Furthermore, Michelle was afraid of being judged by her colleagues if she publicized the situation. Because, as usual, how does it go? The man is not to blame for anything. If a man hits on a woman, it means she's guilty of it and has apparently shown her easy availability. Once Michelle tried to cool the boss's ardour. In response to a crude hint that he wanted to keep Michelle after work and check whether she had made the bed in the hotel's luxury suite properly, the girl said, "Mr. Miller, I'm not interested in that. I have no time or desire for a relationship." "But I'm not offering you a relationship," the man replied, not at all flustered. "We're adults, Michelle, and I would like to have a close colleague. Believe me, it's good for you too. Who knows, maybe the administrator's position will soon become available. I'll help you. Or are you planning to clean the toilets forever?" "No, thank you. I'll achieve everything on my own," she said. "You're foolish, Michelle. Soon you'll understand that everything in the world is for sale. It's just a matter of price." Sometimes the man got angry when the girl ignored him. Then trouble would descend on Michelle like an abundance. One time he'd give her a ticket for some invisible speck of dust in her room that she'd wiped clean, and the next time he'd scold her so that the whole hotel would be awake. The last time Michelle was scolded in front of the entire staff for her kind treatment of a guest. He accused her of flirting with him. Of course, nothing of the sort had happened, but it was useless to argue with the manager. Lately, Greg Miller had been keeping an eye on the girl's schedule, carefully checking to make sure she doesn't leave work early or show up late. And he threatened to fire her all the time. Fortunately, the evil manager was hardly the only fly in the ointment. Well, except for heavy carts with chemicals and the need to perfectly make other people's beds in 2 minutes, like in the army. Hurriedly changing and trying to ignore the fact that Greg's predatory gaze was crawling on her back like a spider, the girl rushed out of the room. She was immediately seized by the routine of work, and time flew by swiftly. She didn't have time to look back when it was time for lunch. The staff was also fed deliciously here. Soup, main course and coffee, as it should be. The girl was finishing her lunch when she was called. "Michelle," the receptionist called, peering into the kitchen. "Will you check how the new girl cleaned up around the open pool? There was a party there yesterday, and I have to meet a guest now. It's getting sunny outside, and people might go to relax and find something inappropriate over there." "No problem," Michelle nodded. There were 2 pools at the hotel, an outdoor one and an indoor one. Yesterday there was a Hawaiian-themed party at the first one. Happy guests left behind bright leis, as well as half coconut and pineapple shells, which were used as cocktails. Approaching the pool, Michelle noticed that the sun was indeed reluctantly appearing in the sky. The weather in their area was changeable. The girl managed to go outside, looking for traces of revelry, when she heard a strange sound. She turned in its direction at the moment when a little boy had already approached the edge of the pool. He was on his knees, reaching for something drifting in the water. Michelle realized that the Hawaiian lei made of red flowers, lying on the water, had attracted the kid. The girl hurried to the child and was about to shout to him that it was dangerous, but she didn't have time. Before her eyes, the boy slid on his knees along the wet edge of the pool and fell into it, splashing water around. "Oh my goodness!" the girl screamed, seeing such a frightening sight. Without hesitation, and with seconds ticking away, Michelle ran towards the child. When she reached the edge of the pool, where the boy was, she plunged into the water. The girl struggled to pull him out of the water. Her hands were shaking, either from the weight or from tension and fear, and she didn't listen to her. When Michelle got out of the water and put her ear to the child's chest, she realized with horror, he's not breathing. She frantically tried to figure out what to do. She started shouting for help, but people could be drawn to the pool only by the sun and music, not by someone else's screams. The lessons on first aid for drowning seemed like a thing of the past. She didn't understand what to do. Should she run for help? But time was probably running out. The girl pulled herself together and, trying to stop the sobs that were bursting out of her chest, began pressing on the boy's chest, pumping water out of his lungs. Then Michelle started using artificial respiration. She forgot about everything, focusing only on one thing, saving the child's life. And the miracle that the girl had prayed for inside herself happened. The boy began to spit out water. The child's eyes opened, clear and blue as the sky. He looked at the girl in fright. Coming to his senses, the boy began to breathe spasmodically, and then he cried loudly. Michelle, to her shame, also burst into tears, only from joy and relief. "It's okay now, it's okay now," she said through her own tears, hugging and trying to calm the child. The ambulance called by the staff arrived quickly. The child was taken to the hospital, but for Michelle, who had not yet recovered from the shock, the terrible surprises did not end there. "What is this?" Greg burst into the staff lounge, breathing fury. Michelle trembled with fear when she saw the manager, even though the workday had ended and she was already in her own clothes. Trying to calm down, she sipped the chamomile and lemon balm tea that her friend the bartender had kindly prepared for her. "Is something wrong, Mr. Miller?" the girl asked, clasping her fingers tightly around the cup. "Where are you going, Michelle?" "Home? The workday is over," Michelle replied. "Oh, really? And do you think you did a good job? Why do I pay you, Michelle? To be told off for some brat who wanders around all over the place?" The girl understood the reason for her boss's anger. The owner of the entire hotel chain, Mr. Keshawarz, had decided to visit them and check the staff's work on this very day, when a tragedy had almost occurred at the hotel. And judging by what the observant Claire had overheard, he was very unhappy with how things were going in his hotel. He rebuked the manager for his careless attitude towards work, including towards the pool, where staff were supposed to be present. But Greg had occupied everyone with his personal orders. Michelle did not feel sorry for the manager, nor did she feel any joy. She felt a strange emptiness from the stress she had just experienced. "I know you're upset, but I'm done with work and I'm going home," Michelle calmly replied. "And what I didn't have time for, the girls let me know. They'll clean up the rest of the third floor themselves." "And who said you could give orders?" "I didn't finish my job in time because the paramedics wouldn't let me." Michelle began to justify herself, but the man didn't want to listen to her. He was angry, so he decided to take it out on Michelle. "You know what? I'm tired of your stubborn behavior," he said unexpectedly, looming over the girl and lowering his tone. "I'm so tired of it that I'm itching to sign an order to fire you." "Why?" protested the girl. "Because I saved a child?" "Quiet," he said, unpleasantly patting the girl's knee. "You know, I'll give you one more chance." The girl irritably pushed his hand away. "No, thank you," she said through her teeth. "Are you certain?" Greg snorted. "And what if we say the boy fell because of you? Maybe it was you who pushed him. After all, there was only one of you there. You're smart, of course, for ultimately saving him, but you have no idea how influential his father is." "Are you blackmailing me?" "Oh, of course not. How could you say that?" "I'm just thinking," he said, grinning. "And I offer you the most reasonable way out of our situation. You're not a stupid girl, and you'll make the right choice. Won't you?" Michelle nodded decisively. She put the half-empty cup on the table. Unfortunately, the drink no longer tasted good. Standing up, the girl looked directly into the manager's eyes. "Fire me then," she threw at him. "I won't come to work tomorrow." Mr. Keshawaz was a widower and a single father who owned a chain of hotels. He was doing very well in his business, but being the only parent was harder for him than his work. Of course, he tried to give his child the best of everything, but Alan was an unruly 4-year-old boy, as expected, and today the boy ran away from his nanny. "Why did you do that, sonny? Why did you run away from the nanny?" The father gently scolded his son, sitting by his bed in the hospital room. "You scared me." "I'm sorry, Daddy," the boy said, blinking with sincere disappointment as he looked at his father. "I ran away from Nanny because I wanted to have an adventure, like real pirates, and there was a pool there." "Well, you've got plenty of adventure," the father smirked, stroking the boy's unruly head with his big palm. "And where's Mum? Will she come see me?" the boy suddenly asked. The man stared at his son with an almost frightened look. "Sweetheart, I've already explained to you. Your mum is in heaven." "But she saved me. She pulled me out of the water. I saw her. She hugged me, Daddy," the child insisted, looking at his father with a serious expression beyond his years. "I felt so good." At that moment, Mr. Keshawaz remembered that it was a woman who had saved his son. In the midst of everything, he had forgotten about her. When he was told the terrible news about his son, Mr. Keshawaz almost turned grey. Just 3 years ago, Mr. Keshawaz lost his wife and was terrified of losing his son. He had no time for gratitude or politeness. However, the doctors said that if it hadn't been for that woman, they wouldn't have been able to save Alan. The man made a mental note that he must express his endless gratitude to the woman and buy her something. Flowers or chocolates, perhaps. It had been a long time since he had spoken to a woman. He had even lost the skill. Besides his business and Alan, he had no time for anything else. Said and done. The next morning, without delay, Mr. Keshawaz arrived at the hotel. He was met by Kate, the receptionist, who was always smiling and friendly. "Good morning, Mr. Keshawaz," the girl beamed. "Good morning, Kate. Could you please tell me if the girl who helped my son by the pool yesterday is working today, and who is she?" Kate seemed embarrassed and looked away. "Unfortunately, Michelle was fired," she said. "She was a maid, but she doesn't work here anymore." "Why?" Mr. Keshawaz was taken aback. Wasn't the worker entitled to a bonus, a reward, a vacation or something else for saving a drowning child? They couldn't have fired her, could they? "I don't know," Kate lied blatantly, and then, as if she had made up her mind, she added, "Ask Mr. Miller." And here too, that damn Greg Miller is involved, thought Mr. Keshawaz. He really didn't like the manager's work. Mr. Keshawaz had only been in this hotel for a week, and he had noticed many shortcomings, gaps, and even dubious machinations. And all these threads led to the slippery manager. But Mr. Keshawaz didn't like to jump to conclusions. Instead, he asked for the security camera recordings, and 15 minutes later, Mr. Keshawaz saw the bravery of the girl who, on the video, seemed very young and fragile, but saved his son. After watching, Mr. Keshawaz called Greg to his office. Greg, in response to a straight answer about why the girl was fired, began to twist. Finally, he said it was her decision. "This girl is very eccentric," he began to tell Mr. Keshawaz about Michelle. "She has been wanting to leave for a long time. Should I keep her by force?" But Mr. Keshawaz was sure that something was fishy here. That evening, taking a bouquet of flowers and a box of expensive chocolates, the man went to the address indicated in the former employee's resume. A young and beautiful girl in a blue dress opened the door for him. Mr. Keshawaz was taken aback when he saw her and realized what his son had in mind. The girl was subtly similar to his dead wife. "Who are you?" asked the young woman, surprised. Behind her, an elderly woman and a little boy appeared, the same age as Alan. "To see you," Mr. Keshawaz replied.
"Oh, my goodness! Did you come to propose to my granddaughter?"
the old woman exclaimed, clapping her hands in joy.
"Grandma,
The girl blushed deeply and shook her head reproachfully. Mr. Keshawaz just laughed, noting that in his suit and with such a gentleman's set he did look like a groom. But the most important thing was that the grandmother was right, because Mr. Keshawaz and Michelle got married a year later after he proposed to her. But that first evening, over a cup of tea, Michelle told Mr. Keshawaz why she had declined the job at the hotel. Mr. Keshawaz began an investigation, finding many victims of Greg Miller. The manager was fired. Michelle's dream also came true. She had her own family hotel by the sea, a cosy place for a peaceful rest and a happy life, which her husband gave her. She did not live there, but in a cosy house, with her grandmother, younger brother, husband, and son Alan, who immediately recognized her as his mother and Kevin as his brother. They were all so close, as if they had lived together all their lives. And soon she and Mr. Keshawaz were expecting a daughter, and they knew for sure that there would be no happier child. "Get ready, daughter. Today I'm going to introduce you to Wallace," Sherelle said, scrutinizing herself in the mirror. "Mum, why do we need him? I love you, you love me, and we're happy together," little Melissa objected seriously. With difficulty, hiding a smile in the corners of her mouth, Sherelle was surprised at how clever her daughter had become. "She's only 10, and she thinks like an adult," thought the woman, for whom her little girl had been the meaning of life all this time. Then, looking at Melissa with a slight reproachful glance, she said, "My dear, maybe it's good for us to be together, but you need a father, and I need a husband." Sherelle raised her daughter alone, paying for the mistakes of her youth when she fell in love with a travelling biker. Now, of course, she understood that this relationship was a mistake, but the past could not be undone. But every cloud has a silver lining. If Victor hadn't left her then, she might have remained the librarian, an inconspicuous grey mouse, living from paycheck to paycheck. Instead, left alone with her little daughter, she had to use all her mental and physical abilities, revealing a hidden potential that Sherelle had never even suspected before. She was an orphan relying only on herself. The school of life that she had to go through in the orphanage hardened her character, instilling confidence in her. After she found herself in a difficult situation, to her surprise, she discovered a passion for commerce and business. Sherelle started by distributing advertising brochures and selling flowers. Then, the determined young woman moved into the beauty and cosmetics industry, working her way up from a simple manicurist to the owner of her own beauty salon. The first success and the first money inspired Sherelle, and after a while she strengthened her position in this business. Now she stood firmly on her own 2 feet, with a network of beauty salons. But there was a negative side to all of this. Without any constraints on her means, Sherelle was terribly lonely and dreamed of a reliable life partner. It hurt her to lie down in a cold, empty bed and greet the dawn alone. Sherelle wanted romance, flowers for no reason, and morning kisses from her beloved. So when she met Wallace, she immediately decided that this was her chance to be happy, and she couldn't miss it. Wallace, a representative and charming brunette, looking at her from a photo on a dating site, instantly won Sherelle's heart. Communicating on the internet, Sherelle caught herself thinking that she felt very comfortable with the young man, whom she considered the ideal of a real man in absentia. At the beginning of their acquaintance, Wallace behaved somewhat strangely. The man had already scheduled meetings in restaurants or cafes, but at the very last moment he always cancelled them, citing personal problems and a heavy workload at work. Sherelle's dissatisfaction reached its peak when Wallace once again scheduled a meeting at a cafe around the corner. Anxiously looking around at the screen of her mobile phone, the woman was waiting for her virtual suitor to cancel the meeting again, but to her surprise, it didn't happen. Wallace met them at the entrance to the cafe with a bouquet of roses for Cherelle and a small plush teddy bear for Melissa. The girl took the gift in her hands with distrust. Although Wallace wanted to seem good and caring, Melissa didn't really like him. The girl felt his hostility and insincerity. He was like a carnival clown who, while smiling broadly at customers, felt absolutely no feelings for them. All evening, Wallace joked and told interesting stories, which brought Cherelle indescribable delight. She hadn't had such a good time in a long time, feeling like she was on cloud nine from happiness. When it was time to leave and pay for dinner, Wallace suddenly hesitated, complaining that he had lost his wallet somewhere. "Wallace, forget about it. I don't even want to hear about it. I'll pay for everything now," generously said Cherelle, leaving a very generous tip for the waiter. Wallace escorted Cherelle and Melissa to their home, where they warmly said goodbye, exchanging sweet cheek kisses. "So how do you like Wallace, Melissa?" asked Cherelle when they entered the apartment. "Mum, I don't like him. He's sly and his eyes are cold." "Oh, come on, my dear. How could you, a little girl, know about men's eyes?" "Well, okay, go brush your teeth and go to bed. It's already late," commanded Cherelle, not taking her daughter's words seriously. And little Melissa, hiding under the covers with her head, silently prayed that her mum wouldn't be friends with Wallace. She didn't like him at all, and his jokes were not understandable or funny. Thomas from next door is a different story. What a man! What a great man! He fixed my bike and replaced the tyre when I hit a nail, and his son Todd is such a good friend. I can trust him with secrets and ask for help if needed. Oh, it's a pity that my mum doesn't know Thomas, thought Melissa, tossing and turning in bed. She and Todd had been friends since kindergarten, and Melissa often visited his house. Thomas loved animals very much, and they had 2 cats, a little dog, and even fish in an aquarium that took up about half of the wall in the living room. There used to be a turtle named Tortilla, but since she was lonely, Thomas released her to be with her kind in the city pond. As she drifted off to sleep, Melissa thought, "Oh, if only Mum and Thomas could become friends, that would be great." But the girl didn't know that Cherelle had fallen in love with Wallace at first sight. It happens when you meet someone and like everything about them. The man didn't talk much about himself, saying that he had been a newcomer and that he had achieved everything by himself, working as a manager for some company on the outskirts of the city. Wallace knew how to impress and show himself in the best light. Flowers, gifts, and restaurants followed one another with remarkable regularity. Cherelle, who felt an incredible surge of emotion, was ready to follow him to the ends of the earth, and finally they were headed for marriage. However, her friends advised Cherelle not to rush into marriage, saying, "Why tie yourself down? Just live together for now. Many people do it this way. It's simple and reliable. If something happens, you can just go your separate ways. No courts or divorce proceedings." But Cherelle simply waved this away, thinking that her friends were just envious of her happiness. Of course, they would like to have such a handsome man for themselves. Everyone knows how to envy. Usually men don't insist on marriage, but Wallace twisted and turned like a snake to convince Cherelle that they needed to legalize their relationship. "Sweetie, why are we like little children meeting in hotels all the time? Let's live together already, like all normal people. Let's have a baby, a cat and a dog." These words brought tears to Cherelle's eyes, and she threw herself into the arms of her beloved. "He's my sweet and only destiny. What other doubts could there be?" thought Cherelle, agreeing with Wallace about the need for a quick marriage. They had a grand wedding, and Cherelle spared no expense. She wanted this event to remain in her memory forever. After the wedding ceremony, the newlyweds moved into a new spacious apartment that Cherelle had purchased specifically for this purpose. And she also gave her husband a truly luxurious wedding gift, buying him a brand new sports car. Perhaps at her mum's wedding only Melissa felt sad, because she understood that Wallace was not as simple as he seemed. But when you are only 10 years old, it's difficult to go against your parents' will, so Melissa had to accept it and move on. Time passed quickly and 6 months went by like a day. Melissa and her stepfather never developed a trusting relationship. Deep down, they didn't love each other. "Todd, you know, my new dad is strange. He often disappears when my mum's at work, spends money left and right, and wants a new car even better than the last one," Melissa said, wanting to share her deepest thoughts with her friend. "Well, he can do that because he's rich, but my dad works at the factory and he can only buy me a toy car," Todd said, sighing sadly. His mother died many years ago and his father raised him alone, neglecting his personal life in an effort to provide for his son. And then once, Melissa accidentally overheard a very strange conversation Wallace had on the phone. That day, on her way to the playground, she realized she had forgotten her ball and had to go back for it. Quietly opening the front door, she immediately heard Wallace's loud voice coming from the bedroom. "Yes, Pam, everything is fine." "Well, of course I missed you. What's the matter? Tomorrow my witch will go on a business trip, and then we'll have some fun." "Yeah, I love you. Kisses, kitten." After hearing all of this, Melissa blushed and ran out, slamming the door. She sat in the playground almost until the evening, crying and wiping away tears from her face. She probably would have spent the whole night there too, if she hadn't been picked up by her mum coming home from work. "What happened? Why are you crying? Who hurt you, my dear?" her mum asked. Mum, something happened," the girl mumbled, recounting everything she had involuntarily heard. After listening to Melissa, her mother became as dark as a cloud. That evening, a serious conversation took place between Sherelle and Wallace in the kitchen. "Darling, why don't you believe me? Understand that I love you, and I have no reason to lie to you. Do you believe me or your little liar? Don't you know that children at that age love to fantasize? So don't take the arguments of a 10-year-old girl as gospel truth." "Well, and if you don't believe me, let's get divorced," Wallace said cunningly, emphasizing the last sentence. "Well, okay. I admit that maybe I overreacted. Jealousy got the best of me. Everything piled up on me at once, and it was a bad day at work. In short, I'm sorry. You're not to blame for anything," Sherelle said shyly, hugging her beloved husband. Since then, Wallace had harbored a grudge against his stepdaughter, considering her responsible for all his troubles. Once, when Melissa was alone with him, he said, "Listen, you little brat, if you say one more word against me, I'll strangle you first and then your mother. Don't meddle in my affairs, and keep your mouth shut. So, little bird, live for now, but don't chirp." After these words, Melissa was finally convinced that Wallace was not who he pretended to be. Understanding that her mother would no longer believe her words, the girl decided to act more decisively. Melissa started to monitor her stepfather closely, intending to gather evidence of his lies. She had already noticed more than once that Wallace took the keys to their old apartment for some reason, and stayed there for a long time. She followed him and saw he was going there with some woman. Melissa shared her suspicions with her friend Todd. "I know he's up to no good, but I can't prove it. Mum won't believe me anymore. While she's away on business trips, he's blatantly deceiving her. It hurts me so much for my mum," said the girl. "Listen, let's put a camera there," Todd suggested. "We have one. Dad installed it on the staircase landing. Someone used to spray paint and leave drawings." "What if it doesn't work?" asked the girl. "Don't worry. I saw how Dad set it up. It's very simple. No more complicated than digging around on a smartphone," reassured Todd, who wanted to help Melissa in trouble. The next day, the kids set out to implement their plan. Knowing that Wallace usually goes to the apartment mainly after noon, the children took the keys and installed the camera in the morning. Feeling like spies, the kids happily giggled and shook hands. "Well, now you can keep the record on your computer or on your phone at your will in general. By the way, I consulted with Daddy. I told him that we needed to watch squirrels in the park, Todd said. Now they could only hope that everything would work out. Fortunately, they didn't have to wait long. After lunch, Wallace went to the old apartment, where he stayed almost until the evening. And the next morning, Melissa gave her mother a flash drive with a video recording. She had just returned from a business trip. "What is this, daughter? Your next artwork?" Sherelle asked incredulously. "Mum, there's a recording with Wallace. I didn't watch it myself, it's for you. In general, you'll understand," Melissa said. Intrigued, Sherelle threw the flash drive into her pocket, but she could only watch the recording on her work laptop. After seeing everything, her face changed instantly, and she turned pale. Waiting until evening, Sherelle took Melissa from school and went straight to her old apartment to check on it. When she opened the front door, she saw a half-naked woman in the hallway whom her husband Wallace was hugging. "Get out of here, both of you. You have no business here. Forget about me and my family." An angry Sherelle screamed. She couldn't wrap her head around such treachery. Quickly getting dressed, Wallace's mistress quietly slipped out of the apartment. But the hero lover, on the contrary, behaved rudely and clearly did not intend to leave the apartment. "But why are you staring at me? Did you think you could buy me? Yeah? Hold your pockets wider. It's all your little brat's fault, but it's okay, I'll get to you quickly," Wallace growled, intending to grab Melissa by the hair, but Sherelle stood up to defend her daughter. "Oh, you're like that? Well, fool, you'll get it too," the man said. After the revelation of his cheating, he was left with nothing to lose. A fight broke out, with Wallace having the upper hand due to his strength. Poor Melissa ran crying to the neighbours to call for help. Luckily, Todd and Thomas were home and immediately responded to the girls' call. Wallace had already knocked Sherelle to the floor, gripping her throat with a deadly grip. But fortunately, help arrived just in time. Thomas delivered dozens of punches to Wallace, although he himself was hit hard too. Wallace was literally crazed with anger, and his strength would have been enough for 10 people. Finally, they managed to subdue the cheating husband with great effort. Meanwhile, Sherelle called the police and immediately provided testimony on the scene. Wallace now faced a real prison sentence for assault and attempted murder. Sherelle apologized to Melissa for not trusting her and not believing her the first time. The woman also wanted to thank Thomas and give him the car she had bought for Wallace, but to her great surprise, the man refused. "You know, if you don't mind, the best way to thank me would be a modest dinner at the cafe on the embankment. They have great cuisine and the place is gorgeous." Sherelle, who needed a sharp change of scenery after this shock, agreed with pleasure. They went to the cafe with Todd and Melissa. The children frolicked happily, laughing and sailing paper boats that Thomas skillfully made from paper napkins. Sherelle didn't know that the charming man had been in love with her for a long time, but was afraid to admit it, ashamed of his poverty. Of course, a woman couldn't forget Wallace right away. Ahead of her were divorce and a trial against her ex-husband. After that recording on the flash drive, something broke in Sherelle's heart, and the romantic haze scattered in her head. Now the woman no longer believed in sweet words, preferring to trust reliable people like Thomas. Feelings for Thomas didn't spark in one moment, and it took a lot of time before Sherelle felt ready for a new relationship. Thomas didn't try to deceive or flatter her, but simply made a manly proposal of marriage, which the woman loved. Sherelle, of course, agreed, to the great joy of Todd and Melissa, who used to consider themselves brother and sister and could now rightfully call themselves that. Melissa and Thomas didn't have a lavish wedding. Instead, they modestly signed at the registry office. Thomas became a reliable support for Sherelle, helping her with her business vision. Comfort, love, and abundance now reign in their family. Comfort, love, and abundance now reign in their family. Mr. Gibson thought every morning that he would give up this job After all, he's already 64 years old. It's time to rest. And yet, day after day, he went through the forest like a madman, working as a gamekeeper. They couldn't find a replacement for him yet. Mr. Gibson's whole life had passed in the forest. When he came back from the army, they convinced him to work in the district forest as a gamekeeper. He loved his job and couldn't imagine himself without it. It was in the forest that he met Mary, his future wife. It was quite funny. They lived in the same village but had never seen each other. Mary had just come from the city to her grandmother's for the summer. She went to the forest for berries and got lost. She was sitting on a stump crying, and then Mr. Gibson came out of the spruce grove. He saw the girl sitting there, approached her, calmed her down, and they got to know each other. Then they returned to the village together, and Mary never went back to the city. She married Mr. Gibson. Her parents were shocked. She left the capital suitors for a simple gamekeeper. But Mary and Mr. Gibson were happy, and they lived soul to soul throughout their lives. They raised a daughter who now lives in the city. Recently, Teresa got married and got a job at a prestigious trading company. And everything would be fine, but then tragedy struck. Mary died. The doctors discovered a tumour too late, and nothing could be done. It was hard for Mr. Gibson in the first few months after his wife's funeral. His wife invited him to live with her, but he didn't go. Where could he go from his village and his wife's grave? Everything here was familiar and dear. And the forest. It was the forest that brought him back to life, calmed his thoughts and his heart, and even eased his longing for Mary. No, Mr. Gibson was not going to quit his job. The forest was his life. That morning, Mr. Gibson, as usual, left the house. The sun peeked out from behind the forest. The sky was clear and clean. The warm wind hugged him. Birds chirped in the bushes. It was going to be a good day. Mr. Gibson decided to visit the distant clearing. 2 days ago, Henry, a local boy, saw strangers there. He went there for berries and said that a black foreign car was parked by the forest. Maybe someone just came to the forest, or maybe they had bad intentions. It was worth checking. The old man started his old motorcycle and headed out on the dirt road, riding and enjoying nature. There's no better place on earth. He thought the city was nothing compared to this place. He'd been there a few times and didn't like it. Noise, hustle and bustle, heavy air. His place was much better. Spacious and easy to breathe. When Mr. Gibson reached the distant clearing, silenced the motorcycle and rolled it up to the nearest pine tree, saying, "Stand here, buddy. No one will touch you here." And indeed, everyone in the neighbourhood knew the old gamekeeper's motorcycle, and if they saw it near the forest, they became more disciplined. They did not make noise, did not break branches, did not throw garbage. The old gamekeeper walked through the forest and everything seemed to be in order. Apparently, Henry was making trouble for nothing. Mr. Gibson was about to turn back when he suddenly heard moaning or crying coming from the dry snag in the forest. He listened and realized someone seemed to be whining. Taking his old shotgun, he cautiously moved towards the clearing. He approached and was stunned. A lynx was sitting 10 steps away from him, a large, young, beautiful sample. Only the tufts on her ears drooped, and there was silent pain in her eyes. The old man glanced down and groaned in frustration. Both of the lynx's front paws were tightly clamped in a huge trap. "That's what the newcomers did here yesterday," he thought. "They set traps for bears. What a rascal!" The old man cursed and took a step towards the lynx. The iron jaws tightly gripped the paws and were deeply embedded in the animal's flesh. It looked like even the bone was broken. Mr. Gibson didn't know what to do. The poor thing was suffering and had to be put out of its misery. The lynx was unlikely to let him approach her, and with such wounds, the animal was unlikely to recover. And now it is hot, flies are buzzing around, and infection will quickly appear. The lynx will die a painful death. It's better to do it now. thought Mr. Gibson, and raised his shotgun. Their eyes met. She stared without blinking, waiting for death as a relief from suffering. Suddenly, the animal jerked and looked in a different direction, as if saying goodbye. The old gamekeeper involuntarily looked in that direction too. In a pile of fallen branches and bushes, he noticed a little muzzle. A lynx cub, handled in the branches, froze, waiting for its mother's death. He understood everything and was ready to rush to help, but his mother had taught him to hide in the presence of humans. Humans meant death, so the lynx sat there motionless, not daring to disobey its mother's orders. Mr. Gibson lowered his gun. "All right, Mummy," he said calmly. "It looks like it's too early for you to die. We need to bring up your cub, and so, my friend, we'll figure something out." He walked up very close to the animal, sat down next to it on its haunches, and carefully examined the trap. The lynx, exhausted, hardly moved at all. It had lost a lot of blood and was very weak, only opening its mouth to reveal its sharp teeth. But even this it did weakly, without strength. It was clear that it didn't have enough strength to bite the man. "How did you manage to get caught like this?" the gamekeeper asked the lynx, carefully touching the strong jaws. "It looks like you jumped from above. And what made you come to this logging site?" "Oh, silly thing. Well, never mind, we'll figure something out now." Mr. Gibson went to his motorcycle for tools. Thanks to a small pry bar, he managed to free the animal. The lynx only groaned quietly all this time. At first, it tried to bite, but it only had enough strength to weakly press against the man's hand. "Just sit still, please," the gamekeeper scolded without malice. "I'm doing you good, and you still want to eat me?" The lynx cub watched the man's actions from the bushes all this time, and only when Mr. Gibson freed the lynx, and it helplessly fell on the grass. The cub, disobeying all its mother's instructions, crawled up to it and, whining pitifully, snuggled up to its belly. "Your baby's hungry," the gamekeeper said, deliberately and strictly, "and you're lying there." And then he added more gently, "Well, never mind. We'll get you to my home now, feed everyone and nurse you back to health. Everything will be fine." He had decided to take the lynx with him when he was tinkering with the trap. After all, what was the use of freeing it? It wouldn't survive on its own. It needed the lynx's help. And under his supervision, it would quickly recover in his barn, and the lynx cub would definitely survive. Otherwise, in the forest, it had little chance. It was only about 2 months, no more. When the people in the village saw who the gamekeeper was carrying, they recoiled to the side. A beast's muzzle peered out from under the cover. "Mr. Gibson, is it dead?" shouted the neighbour from the porch of his house. "What do you mean, dead?" The old man raised his eyebrows. "It's still alive, just tired out too much. And look at this little addition." And the old man pulled the lynx cub out of his backpack. It only whimpered with fear and closed its eyes. "What are you going to do with it?" asked the neighbour, looking at the lynx, which was barely breathing. "Maybe it's better to put it out of its misery. And by the way, it has such a beautiful skin." "To put it out of its misery?" Mr. Gibson got angry. "I'll take care of it. God willing, it will recover." "And the cub? It's so small it will die," the neighbour persisted. "What are you going to feed it with? It probably still drinks milk from its mother." "You're getting on my nerves." The old man raised his voice. "I'll figure it out without you." Arranging the lynx and the cub on the straw in his barn, the old man said, "Remember, you must survive against all evil tongues. Otherwise, why did I drag you through the forest, straining myself? And you, little one, while I caught you at the logging site, tore my hands, so you must survive." The old man, the lynx and the cub were all going through a difficult time. There was a moment when Mr. Gibson had already given up hope. The wounds wouldn't heal and the fever persisted. No medicine helped. The local veterinarian advised shooting the animal, but the gamekeeper cursed him with so much profanity that the vet ran away far from the mad gamekeeper. And the lynx cub worried him. It wouldn't drink cow milk, it refused to suck from a bottle, and then suddenly Teresa, his daughter, called, and Mr. Gibson told her about his troubles. She quickly turned to the veterinarians in the capital who worked at the zoo. They advised the necessary antibiotics. Mr. Gibson managed to find them with difficulty in the district centre. The lynx cub was more difficult. It needed special formulas. And where to get them in their wilderness? That's when the old man decided to buy the simplest baby formula. It turned out that lynx cubs are just like babies, and they really love those formulas. The cubs started to get stronger and gain weight right before Mr. Gibson's eyes, and the lynx soon started to recover. The temperature went down and the wound began to heal. The bone was only broken in one leg, and over time she too began to recover. At first the old man fearlessly went into the barn to see his new pets, but soon realized that the lynx could forget all his kindness and attack him. It was, after all, a wild animal. He started to bring his gun with him, holding medicine in one hand and his weapon in the other. Fortunately, he never had to use it, as the lynx accepted him. Of course, when she regained her strength, the old man no longer gave her injections or bandaged her, but he was still wary. He mixed the medicine in with her food, and the lynx happily gobbled up the chicken and milk, carefully keeping an eye on Mr. Gibson. Meanwhile, the lynx cub played nearby, full and content. Then, in the fall, they suddenly disappeared from the barn. Mr. Gibson, as usual, came in the morning with food for his pets, but the barn was empty. He went outside and looked at his faithful dog, Ollie, who was sitting on a chain. So, our guests have left. Thank God. That means they have strength now. Mr. Gibson sadly smiled. Ollie only wagged his tail in response. To be honest, he didn't really like having the tenants in the barn, but since his owner welcomed them, he tolerated them. And he was also afraid of the huge cat that occasionally peeked out of the barn. One winter, Mr. Gibson was returning on skis from the forest when he suddenly felt someone's gaze from above. He looked up and froze. The lynx was sitting right in the tree, and the old man was right under the tree. Well, that's it, she'll attack. The old man only squared his shoulders, but he still reached for his gun. The lynx carefully jumped down next to him and approached the gamekeeper. She even wagged her tail a little. "It's you, my lynx!" the old man exclaimed. "What a beauty you've become! And where is your son? He must have grown up by now." Of course, the lynx didn't say anything to him. She just looked into his eyes, meowed, and jumped into the bushes. Later on the way back, the old man thought about this outstanding encounter. He couldn't believe the animal had not forgotten him. All winter, he occasionally met the lynx. She didn't come close, but she walked beside him as he toured the forest. Several times she even came into his yard. Ollie then protested, barking very loudly. 2 years passed. Mr. Gibson never quit his job. He kept an eye on the forest animals, and with him, the lynx also made her rounds. People were already laughing at him. He had gotten another dog. He just had to put it on a leash. "Why a dog?" "A cat," the hunter laughed. "She's not used to a leash, and not to human hands either. She only follows me from a distance." One summer, Mr. Gibson's daughter was going to visit him. By that time, she and her husband had a son, so the whole family wanted to visit the grandfather. Mr. Gibson was worried about travelling with a little child, but his daughter laughed. The airplane would get there in no time, and then it was just a short taxi ride to her parents' house. In short, the old man didn't persuade the young couple, and soon they arrived together. And he was happy about it. He didn't even try to hide it. Little Bobby was so cute and so tiny. He was only 6 months old, but he looked just like Mr. Gibson. Grandpa was overflowing with pride. Bobby was given a separate room, a small one near the kitchen, the warmest. It seems to be summer, but the baby does not need draught at all. Teresa and her husband James were accommodated in the next bedroom, and Mr. Gibson moved into the living room. In fact, in the small room he usually slept, but he gave up his place for his grandson. They spent time together cheerfully. He and his son-in-law often went fishing and mushroom picking. His daughter stayed home and took care of the baby. In the evenings they all sat under the old apple tree, had dinner and talked. The old man was resting his soul. It was a good idea for his daughter to visit him. Every day they stayed up late chatting, while Teresa listened intently to make sure her son Bobby was asleep in the room. "Should we close the window?" Teresa worried. "I opened it for Bobby because it was stuffy. I'm afraid it might get drafty." "Don't worry," James reassured her. "It's stuffy outside and even more so inside. The child won't be able to breathe at all." "Yes, you're right," Teresa agreed. Later she went to check on her son. Mr. Gibson and his son-in-law were discussing their previous fishing trip, arguing about which tackle was better. Suddenly they heard Teresa's muffled scream and rushed into the house. Teresa stood on the threshold, pale as chalk. "There's a lynx sitting by Bobby's bed. I didn't notice it at first in the dark. Then its eyes started glowing. I looked closer and saw the tufts of fur on its ear in the moonlight. It's sitting right by the bed and hissing at me," Teresa whispered. "I backed away so as not to anger it, but it's still there." "And what about Bobby?" James also turned pale. "He seems to be sleeping, snoring." "I heard him," Teresa replied. "Everyone, calm down," Mr. Gibson said slowly, stepping into the house, holding a thick club in his hands. "Dad, be careful," Teresa whispered. "It might attack you or Bobby." But Mr. Gibson didn't listen to her. He entered the room and saw a shadow flit by the open window. "It's my lynx," Mr. Gibson guessed, watching the animal disappear. He was limping slightly on his right paw. The lynx moved like this now, having been saved once by the gamekeeper, with its right paw, the one that was more severely wounded, apparently healing somewhat crookedly. The old man watched as the lynx moved away and mentally scolded himself. Why did he save this animal? Now it would clearly be circling around his house. Maybe it was jealousy. The gamekeeper didn't know, but he had no other explanation. "I should catch the animal," the gamekeeper decided. "Catch it and scare it with shots, maybe even hurt it." Mr. Gibson did not see any other way to drive the lynx away from his house and family. From that evening on, all the windows in the house were closed. Teresa and James only walked with Bobby in the yard, and they stopped going to the forest altogether. The mood was entirely ruined. Mr. Gibson noticed how his daughter was looking at the calendar, counting the days. She already wanted to leave her home as soon as possible. She was afraid for her son. But as it turned out, they were afraid of the wrong thing. One night, Mr. Gibson woke up to an unfamiliar noise. He listened. It seemed quiet. Maybe it was just a dream, he thought. He turned over to the other side, but he couldn't fall asleep. The old man decided to drink some water. He turned on the light in the kitchen, reached for the kettle, and froze. His gaze fell on the stairs that led from the kitchen to the attic. Above was a hatch, and on this staircase, Mr. Gibson saw distinct tracks. Large animal tracks. Definitely not cat tracks. Since the children arrived, Mr. Gibson's cat had been temporarily relocated to the barn. Teresa was afraid he might jump into the crib and scare the sleeping Bobby. Mr. Gibson took a closer look. It was a lynx. The old man's heart skipped a beat. How did it figure out how to enter the house through the attic? He had missed that. The door from the roof to the attic was open in the summer to ventilate it. There was a hatch in the attic that led to the house. In winter, the old man closed it with a latch to keep it from getting cold, but in summer, He removed the latch because he sometimes climbed up the stairs to the attic to dry mushrooms and berries there. The hatch could easily be lifted from the attic. But that's for a person. Could a wild animal really figure that out? On tiptoe, he walked to the children's room. At the door, he heard a hiss. In the darkness, the greenish lights flashed again. The lynx was sitting by the crib and hissing. "Lynx, what are you doing?" the old man said softly, mentally scolding himself for going without a gun. But on the other hand, how could he shoot with the child sleeping nearby? "Lynx, go away." And then Mr. Gibson heard another sound, as if someone was crawling quickly on the floor. The old man couldn't bear it and turned on the light. Startled, he screamed. Something flashed between the floorboards. "Daddy!" he heard his daughter Teresa's frightened voice. "What happened?" Mr. Gibson turned his completely white face in fear toward his daughter and pointed to a small hole in the floor with a trembling hand. "What?" his daughter exclaimed, then saw the lynx and without hesitation rushed to the crib. "My little son!" The noise woke up little Bobby and he cried loudly. Teresa picked him up and ran out of the room. James was already running towards her with a gun. "I'll shoot her now, back off!" the man shouted and aimed. The lynx huddled in the corner and only its eyes sparkled. "Don't you dare!" suddenly shouted Mr. Gibson. "Don't shoot! She saved your son!" "How so?" James stared at the old man in bewilderment and lowered his gun. "She was protecting him from snakes." "Snakes? Father, where are the snakes here?" "I guess under the floor in the old cellar. I saw her slide in there just now." They approached the place that Mr. Gibson indicated. The lid of the old cellar was securely nailed shut, but there was a small hole next to it for the cat. James ran for a crowbar, and soon the lid was lifted. They looked inside and screamed in horror at the same time. Several snakes were wriggling in the cellar, glittering. A bunch of them. Apparently they had bred there. "What do we do with them?" asked James, bewildered. "We'll catch them," Mr. Gibson replied. "I'll get them all quietly." And he then went for a stick and a bag. And Lynx followed him. All this time the animal sat quietly in the corner. Now the lynx reached the stairs, calmly climbed it, pushed the latch with its nose, and quickly got out. The hatch closed. "That's how she comes." Mr. Gibson smiled and wondered. Since when has it been walking into the house through this hole? Oh, and he, an old gamekeeper, didn't notice anything. And he didn't notice the snakes either. He almost lost his grandson. James and Mr. Gibson were busy all night. At first, they caught all the snakes. They turned out to be quite poisonous. After dealing with them, the men inspected the cellar and realized how the snakes got into the house. There was a hole in the foundation, and so the vipers crept in here and lived here peacefully. "I wonder how long they've been here?" Teresa asked when all the work had been done by morning. Bobby was sleeping soundly, and the three of them were drinking tea in the kitchen. "Several months, that's for sure," Mr. Gibson replied and shook his head. "And I didn't notice anything." "But your lynx noticed everything," Teresa smiled. "It turns out she's been walking through this hole in the attic for a long time. It's obvious that she's perfectly oriented in the house. She was guarding you at night at first, and then our son." James shook his head in surprise. "What a clever girl! And I had a gun on her." "It's okay, we sorted it out," Mr. Gibson replied. "She thanked me for healing her and saving her son." "You saved her baby? And she saved ours?" said Teresa. "Animals understand everything. They just can't say it. And how you treat them, that's how they treat you," Mr. Gibson nodded. A week later, Teresa, with her son and husband, left. Mr. Gibson, who had returned from the airport, sat on the bench in front of the house and took a deep breath. Teresa was calling him to come with her again. He misses his family. But to come for a visit and to live are two different things. And then the bushes flashed with brushes. My lynx came. Mr. Gibson smiled. No, I'm not going anywhere from here, as long as I have such protectors here.